If you're going to watch this 3-hour-long interview, please do watch the start because it explains why it's so interesting. We are interviewing one of the original creators of the Elder Scrolls series, Ted Peterson. I'll be asking him questions not only about the Elder Scrolls 6 and the Elder Scrolls series in general, but also about a new Elder Scrolls successor game he's currently working on. I've timestamped all my questions down below in the description for you to navigate this enormous video, but I'd highly suggest subscribing with the bell icon so you can find this video again easily. For those of you that don't know, the Elder Scrolls series was created by 3 key people. Ted Peterson, the writer and designer, Julian LaFay, the programmer and designer, and Vijay Lackshman, the producer and designer. This trio has created and worked on many of the Elder Scrolls games, from Arena, Daggerfall, Morrowind and Oblivion, and even some of the spin-off titles. But they have since split off from Bethesda. However, the same team of creators has since founded a new studio called Once Lost Games, spearheaded by Ted Peterson. The latter part of this interview will contain questions on their new game, its mechanics, systems, lore and aims. You can also bet they'll be reading the comments section for your critique and thoughts, and now is honestly the best time to give them. I'd also suggest checking out their Discord and social media linked below in the description, not just to follow but also to comment on their project, because my god do they listen to fans. This interview though is with Ted Peterson, the man who wrote much of the Elder Scrolls series lore. I'll be getting his opinion on what he thinks about more recent games as well though, like Skyrim, modding, and the Elder Scrolls 6, Dragonbreaks, Akavir, and what happened to the Dwemer, and so on. So leave a like if you're excited because I spent over a week putting this all together. And let's begin. So, every superhero has a good origin story. What's yours? How did you start work at Bethesda?
Oh, okay. So your younger viewers may not believe this, but there was a time before the internet. The way you got a job was you picked up a newspaper and you went to the classified section, and there'd be a little part where it said, in my case, it was the Washington Post, because I graduated from University of North Carolina, and Washington, D.C. was the closest big city where you went to have a job.
Yeah.
And I picked up the Washington Post, went to the classified section, and I was an English major. So I didn't know what to do with that. And so I was filling out a bunch of applications for different jobs for writers. And of course, in Washington, D.C., most of those are the Society for Aquatic Preservation wants somebody to write their newsletter. And
Oh goodness, yeah.
Okay, that sounds like a proper job. Not going to make a lot of money doing that, but that's a fine starting off thing. So I did like 50 of those things. I think you mentioned before we started recording that you had a background in architecture, and my real hope was that I was going to get an internship at the National Foundation for Historic Preservation. That I've always, not surprisingly, since I started doing fantasy role-playing games, but I've always had an interest in old stuff. So that was really appealing to me. I didn't end up getting that internship, but there was I remember it was literally two lines, so like the cheapest possible classified ad you could put in the Washington Post. That didn't even give the name of the company. It just said, looking for a published writer of science fiction or fantasy, P.O. Box, blah, 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 Rockville, Maryland. And if you guys aren't familiar with the geography, Rockville, Maryland, Maryland and Virginia are kind of border Washington, D.C. So that's kind of the Washington Post is a local paper. So I wasn't going to fill it out because I just said, some kid who's doing comic books, put this in the paper. And
right.
is working in his parents' basement, and I didn't even know the name of the company, so I couldn't, I couldn't.
You couldn't do a search, yeah.
Right. So I filled, at the end of doing 50 really dry professional cover letters and resumes, and putting them in envelopes and putting a stamp on them and putting them aside. And I mean, this is before email. This is how life was, kids. That I just for fun said, okay, I'm gonna go ahead and apply for this one. And I wrote, "Dear PO," because I didn't know the name of the company. I am a published writer of science fiction and fantasy, but I do not think that is the way to fame and fortune. But against my wiser judgment, I'm going to go ahead and send you my resume and a sample of my writing. And then I ended it with saying, the only other thing you should know about me is I'm a recent college graduate, perfectly normal in every way, except that when the full moon comes out, I grow a third eye and butterfly wings. And Ted Peterson. And they called me 2 days later, which again was fast for the days of mail.
And may I say, perhaps the most important words you ever wrote.
Mm-hmm. So the lesson there is weird is good.
Yes.
And then that was Bethesda Softworks, and so I went in and interviewed with Vijay Lackshman and Julian and
oh wow,
and they had done Terminator 2029 at the time, and it had been a moderate success for them, and they had a really strong editing system to create levels within the game. And they said, basically any monkey can do this, but we're looking for a writer, because the way it worked was, and again, the tool is fantastic. That it was laying out the level. It was 2.5D, so everything was 90-degree turns. So you're just kind of laying out blocks, and then that's how you create a level.
Okay.
But in between these levels, they had a system where you could write dialogue between the different characters who were sending you off on these missions. So they thought that basically any monkey could lay down a level, but they needed a writer to write the reason why you're
it meaningful. Yeah,
make some sense out of we need you to go into the field and kill 20 Terminators, or whatever, for this reason. So they had me do a test. At the time they'd been discussing, they had never done a role-playing game before, but they were fans, and they said, let's do a role-playing game, but we don't have a design or anything. It's just kind of all way pre-production. But they had me do a design test where they're asking a lot of role-playing questions.
So is this before they hired you? Still, they did this design test.
Well, first of all, I went in a suit, and Julian's first thing was never wear a suit in this business.
Oh God.
And then they had me do this test, and then they had me do a rating test. I had already sent them a rating sample, but then they said, because at the time in their head, we're going to do this game called Arena, which is all gladiatorial combat. So write us a short story where a team of people are going through an arena, and they're fighting creatures, and there's some resolution on it. And so I wrote them a story which they liked the rating on. I remember they hated the boss that I came up with for that fight.
Why?
But they have anyhow.
Can you elaborate on what the boss was and why they didn't like it?
It was a giant walrus.
Oh God. Okay.
I think walruses are really scary. So
I mean, to me they're hilarious. I don't find them scary.
Right? No. You're not alone. that apparently is an idiosyncratic. I wouldn't call it a phobia, because I don't run into walruses very often. But I think they're designed. They're sluggish, and they've got big teeth. So that's scary in some way. Maybe.
Did that somewhat inspire the Hawkers enemies in the Elder Scrolls later on?
I don't think so.
I mean, that would be a fantastic connection.
Unless they just remember me telling this story before. But obviously we never. They weren't inspired enough. We didn't use them in any of the games when I was at Bethesda.
I see. Fair enough. So, I mean, for those people that don't know, what was your role, in your own words, on the Elder Scrolls series?
Well, I started off, like I said, I was hired on at Bethesda as a writer. Um, there weren't any other writers, and my title was a designer, but I designed because that was sort of secondary to being a writer. And while I was working on the add-on pack for Terminator 2029 and also a second Terminator game, I mean, I don't know if this is the case. Actually, this has never been the case in any other company that I've worked for, where it was such a mom and pop, like grind them out type of shop that you were working on multiple games at the same time.
Yes.
So I'd be doing that, and at the same time we'd be working on the designs for Elder Scrolls Arena. And Vijay, really at the time I was there wasn't a designer for the games. Vijay was hired on as a producer because they recognized that their games were behind schedule and they needed someone to keep track of the schedule and create schedules and do all of that. Julian obviously is a programmer, and both of them have strong opinions on games. So we just kind of had people with strong opinions that were, okay, well, this is the way we should do it. But there weren't design documents or anything like that. And you can tell on Arena, at least the history of Arena, was that it began as being sort of an RPG light game, and then adding the prefix the Elder Scrolls wasn't until late in development that was done. It was just going to be called Arena. So when I'd be working on design documents for Arena at the same time. And so I was really, I don't know what my credits are on Arena. I think it probably says was like lead Vijay Lackshman, lead designer or something like that. And then I was like designed by or something like that. Basically there were two of us designers, and Vijay was the lead and I was his lackey. But because of the nature of the game, because we thought it was going to be primarily an arena combat action game, that was not the focus. The focus was not the role-playing aspects.
No,
but we always said
you added loads of role-play aspects to it. Like, what was the inspiration for that?
Well, we always said that the way that the game flow of the game was going to work is that you were mostly running around these arenas fighting.
Yes.
But you needed to have some gold to outfit your guys and improve your characters. So on the side, you would do quests for kings and queens of Tamriel. And those, when it turns out the gameplay of running around in these arenas fighting was not that great, then we said, but people actually seem to like the role-playing aspects of it and doing these quests. Then we just changed the focus and said, okay, it's not a role-playing light game, it's kind of role-playing heavy, and all these arena fights turned into these dungeons that you needed to quest through to find the eight pieces of the Staff of Chaos.
Yes,
and then Daggerfall at the end. So I mean, it obviously it turned out well, but it really is the worst production.
Well, I mean that's the thing, though, isn't it? Because if you look at the writing for Arena, it was like very cookie cutter in terms of a traditional sort of storyline. Whereas in comparison, considering you wrote the Arena and then Daggerfall was insanely complex. You had different factions, kings, queens, politics. It was, I mean, no offense, it was almost like it was written by another person. Like you really, like it changed considerably. What was the reasoning for that massive change? I mean, I know you said you liked the roleplay aspects from Arena, and then you guys just went and completely ran with it. It seemed like.
No. I mean, but that was a reaction, and you're right. The first Elder Scrolls game could not have been more generic in almost every way. And I say this without dismissing it, but I mean the way you advance your character was the old first edition Dungeons and Dragons, kill a monster, get experience point, level up, type of system. And then we switched that system to skills based, because we said, okay, well that was based on the idea that this is really a combat game.
Yes.
That Arena was that, so it made sense to say we're going to reward you for killing things.
Yeah.
And then said, okay, now that we released it and realized that's the wrong philosophy for role playing, that if you're a thief, you don't level up by killing things, or if you're a mage, you don't level up by killing things, and it's using those skills, which makes sense for that character class. So we revamped that system. And then at the same time, when you're talking about the rating aspect of it, I mean, it was so jerry-rigged, the way of flip-flopping what game it was that we were creating, that it really was the most, let's just squeeze this together, where you're, at the end you're fighting an evil wizard, and that's the whole story.
Yes.
When the reviews came out, people were, pretty positive about Arena, but they did say, this writer is shit. And
No.
and I just went, oh, that matters to me. So I'm just going to show you that I can write something really complicated and nuanced and non-linear. I mean, I think that was a big part of what I was going for with in Daggerfall.
I mean, in a way, you can't blame yourself for that, because you were sort of corkscrewed into, this is the game we're making, you have to write a story for it, and then it just turned into an RPG and you didn't have the opportunity to elaborate on everything you could have done, which you then later did in Daggerfall. Which, I mean, Daggerfall has, what, like 6 different endings?
Is it 6?
Sorry?
I should look that up. Is it 6?
I think it was. I believe...
Okay. I'll take your word for it.
But I mean, what I found interesting was how, because at that point, the company, Bethesda, was in financial sort of issues and stuff, and you guys released Daggerfall, and it overperformed. Then you ended up working on the sequel, Morrowind. But obviously, because the game had so many endings, you came up with, I think it was explained in a book in Morrowind called The Warp in the West. And essentially it was like, all these endings happened at the same time, kind of like a dragon break. So just to further explain this to the viewers at home, The Elder Scrolls 2 Daggerfall had 6 endings, but to continue to the next game, the development team needed to choose a definitive canon ending to Daggerfall. So the solution was that all the endings happened at once. Now, if you didn't play Daggerfall, during the main story you enter Aetherius, which is Akatosh's realm, and Akatosh is the god of time. So when you enter his realm, you break the fabric of time and you cause a dragon break, or as it was explained in the lore, the warp in the west. This means that even though Daggerfall had 6 different endings, it was explained in the lore that they all happened at the same time. And I was wondering who kind of came up with the concepts, because I thought it was really interesting.
Yeah, I don't know who came up with the concept to answer the simplest part of the question. I think it was probably a combination. Well, at the time, Ken Rolston was a designer on Morrowind. So if he didn't come up with it, he approved of it. There were a lot of different ways we could go with it, and
yeah,
I put them in a bit of a corner by thinking that alternate endings on a game were a good idea.
I think they were, though. That's such an important sort of quality about the roleplay game, the fact that you really felt like your decisions impacted the game and the world around you. So I'm glad
philosophically,
you did that.
I stand by that as a a thing that I like, and I think that it always points to the strength of the medium, that unlike watching TV show or reading a book where it's a passive, well, we're just going to take you on this voyage.
Yeah.
In an interactive game, your decisions should matter, and that's the whole point of the medium. So I stand by that philosophy, but I recognize it's a problem for sequels.
Yes.
But it's been solved in other ways. I mean, at the time that that we were doing those first couple of Elder Scrolls games, Surtech was doing the Wizardry series, and they had a couple ones in that where you could port over your saved game from one game to the next game, or even say, basically, if there are multiple endings on one game, there could be multiple beginnings on the next game.
Yes, yes.
Which I think could have been a solution to the Daggerfall multiple endings problem. So we talked a lot about different ways of solving it, and Dragonbreak is where it landed on, which I think is probably a fine solution, but I do have a little bit of an issue with it in the sense that it does kind of undermine the idea of the game saying you have multiple ways of resolving it, but in the sequel, there's only one way that it was resolved, and it was this Dragonbreak. And
I guess it's like you say, it's one of those things where you get the best of both worlds, in the sense that if you couldn't port over your save file on the decisions you made, the only other resolution was having all the endings actually happened, no matter which ending you picked, and therefore you could carry on. I guess it was a way that made sense at the time. But I also heard from Zarek that the Elder Scrolls 3 was going to be called Tribunal at some point, and it was going to take place in Somerset and follow I think the Princess of Wayrest storyline. So in that sense, did you have like an idea of how you would have liked the game to end and like carry on in a certain narrative in your head when you were sort of making Daggerfall?
You mean like again the multiple endings and how?
Yeah,
how
like what was the ending that you would have gone with that would have taken you to Somerset?
I honestly, my pitch would not have been the Dragonbreak. If I had stayed on at Bethesda, I would have tried to do something like they did in the Wizardry games of having multiple starts. Which is actually makes it even more challenging to write a narrative around that.
Definitely. Especially with how much everything impacted the world with those endings as well.
Well, it's true, but in a way it impacted whether the game, the sequel was set in this Somerset Isle or in Morrowind. It's on the opposite end of the world, so you can still say, okay, I want to say that Numidium, was on Daggerfall's side and conquered the Elec Bay, and the Empire has less power in that region. But you're not there when at the time of the game. So I think that the influence, while it should be noted, it would not be so immediate that that it's immediately taking off the story at the same location as the
totally. You're on the other side of the continent.
Right. So it wouldn't be. It shouldn't drastically change what happens in that game.
I mean, I guess I'm talking from the perspective of that the Elder Scrolls became this huge series, and in the future games you would have heard what happened, so you'd have to think about those narratives, I guess. But I mean, for each Elder Scrolls game created, you expanded on the writing each time in the universe. Do you have a favorite book that you've written in the lore, and why is it your favorite?
I mean, I probably like different books for different reasons. The hardest series to work on was the 2920 series, partly because I was no longer, in a lot of those books cases, I was no longer physically at Bethesda. So I was trying to make sense of different missives from Ken Rolston or Michael Kirkbride or Kirk Coleman.
Because they all had to fit in.
Right. So I kind of got into the story with Vivek and Amalexia and Sothasil, and I was trying to work out the logistics of what their history was and how they influenced things, and so that's probably the book series that took the most pre-planning of like, okay, well these are all the different narratives that need to tie together, and at the end, finish up like that. So I like that series because if you do a lot of planning and it comes together okay, then you go like, okay, well, I'm pleased with that. The book series that I wrote, that's there's one author called Wagan Jarth, which are stories of Decimus Scotti, where it's the Argonian account was the second one, and the first one was
there's a series, isn't there, of that? Something Fire.
Yes, a dance in
fire. Yes, that's right.
Yeah. So those are the most fun ones to write. Where I didn't really plan it out in advance. I just kind of wrote what amused me, and that's a fun way to write too.
I really appreciate that, because I'm actually very dyslexic, and one of the first books I read cover to cover and actually got me into reading more books was The Locked Room, which you also wrote. And my fiance actually illustrated it, and I did like a little reading series on it. And that was kind of those little sort of stories and tidbits I was like, oh, where are these people in the game? Like, they're not there, but you kind of start to then imagine like, oh, well, where would this person be? And what was this narrative going on over here? You can't get there in an Elder Scrolls game yet. So it really brought the world to life for me. So yeah, thanks for that. I thought it was really cool.
I'd love to hear that.
So, I mean, I think the other thing people are really excited about hearing more about is the other continents, not just Tamriel itself, but did you ever like plan when you were developing the game to develop the other continents, even visit them, like Akavir or Yokuda? Yeah, there's even some like islands off the coast of Tamriel as well that we've never visited in any Elder Scrolls game since. But I mean, when you were developing things and drawing the map, was there any sort of thoughts in your head of like, oh yeah, maybe we'll go there sometime, or that'll be related to this?
Sure. No. I mean, when you're doing that world building, you can't really do it without thinking, all right, well, we're not doing this for this game, but in a future game, we're definitely going to go over here and do that, and it's going to be cool for X, Y, and Z reasons. So you do play around with what the setting is and what the differences are. We've always done in the Elder Scrolls, and this is on purpose, have unreliable narration.
Yes.
So in a way, I will utterly defend it, because I think that in real life we have unreliable narration.
100%, especially in history. Like you said, you're really fascinated about architectural history. There's so much of that in there.
Yeah. So I think it makes things more interesting if you pick up a book, and you should take everything with a grain of salt.
Yes.
And think about what the person's motivation is. It's not necessarily my favorite books that I've written, but recall in Daggerfall we had 2 books called The War of Bethany, and one is written from the point of view of Daggerfall, and one is written from the point of view of Sentinel, and they're
completely different, but they have some things that overlap. Yeah, no, I love that. I think the best lore that you've written for the game is the lore that is unwritten intentionally, because that's what makes fans so excited about the series and what makes them want to. I mean, I wrote like a few academic essays when I was doing architecture, and it almost reminded me of why I fell in love with the Elder Scrolls series, because I was reading sort of reliable documents and different sources, and some of them conflicted, especially like on the Roman Empire. And and I love coming out with my own theory on like why this was the way it was, and it's an amazing thing that I think you've definitely like transferred into a video game franchise, which is incredible.
Well, we're definitely in while working on the games. Julian and I particularly were reading a lot of history, and I remember I read a book about Lucretia Borgia, who is sort of famous in history as this kind of evil, conniving Renaissance woman who poisoned her husbands and had all these affairs and stuff. And the book was basically saying the winners write history, and she was kind of dragged through the mud by historical chronicles because her side lost, and that she actually did a bunch of these great things, and she was not given credit for it. So
yes.
Again, that's part of the the fun part of world building, is to say, as a writer, you probably need to know what the real story was, but when you're doing the actual writing, you need to have a perspective of who's writing and who the audience is, and going from that. I think we might have strayed from your question, though.
Potentially, but the straying was very interesting, so I'm not complaining in that sense. Let's have a look. I mean, so yeah, back to the other continents, I guess.
Right.
Yokuda, it was written that it sunk into the ocean, but then there's actually a NPC in Oblivion who lives at the lighthouse in Anvil on the Golden Coast, in Cyrodiil, and he said that he actually quotes ship sail from Anvil Harbour to ports in Hammerfell, Somerset Isle, Yokuda, and the Western Isles. Does that mean that Yokuda is not actually completely submerged and it still exists? Because that's like one of the few references of the modern day that I've ever found about its existence.
Well, I'll say this: I don't work at Bethesda, so I'm not gonna. I can't say Yokuda exists or is a place you're going to be.
I understand your answer wouldn't be definitive in that sense, but I mean, looking at what you've written and
I mean, I obviously we're probably at the time we were writing that inspired by Atlantis or whatever is, and different ways of thinking of a homeland of saying, okay, well, this is the once great or it's like Krypton exploding or whatever. You use okay, well, it's we can never return to that place, and we must make our home here, which is a fine narrative. I think it's always interesting if if someone has been to Yokuda recently and going like, guys, it didn't sink. That was just a story we were told.
Yeah.
I think that's a really interesting narrative worth exploring.
I agree. So, yeah.
I hope they do it.
Oh, for sure. I know that there is a lot of people asking for the Elder Scrolls 6 Akavir and exploring that continent too. So I think people are like very excited to see something completely different and new in that sense. And especially like,
is there gossip that they might do that?
No, that's definitely the fans talking. In terms of like speculation, I think. I mean, I can give you my opinion on it later on in the video for sure. Because I've done like some crazy speculation videos about the Elder Scrolls 6 location. So I mean, the other thing I wanted to ask about is one of the gods, Trinimac, who's considered to be a god, an Aldmer, and it's written in many books that he was eaten by Boethia and reborn as Malacath, the Orc father. Because obviously with his transformation, all his devoted followers turned into orcs. And since Trinimac was like obviously an elf to begin with, does that mean that all orcs are like technically elves or not?
I think that's the implication of it, and orcs are sometimes called Orsamir, which would imply that with the other ones that they are elf ken. So yeah, I think that's the implication of that myth.
Because there was another book called Varieties of Faith, which I thought was really cool because it said that Trinimac had done that intentionally to absorb some of Boethia's powers, and actually then made the people who turned into orcs almost like improved elves. Considering they're so ugly and everyone treats them as outcasts, I thought that was like quite an interesting perspective on it.
Yeah, no, it goes back to our unreliable narrator thing, and I think anything that's happened, a long time ago, any description of this is what really happened should again be taken with a grain of salt. But there should be also people who strongly believe that this is the truth. I mean, there's no reason to write something. I wrote again, it's a point of view thing. There's another book in Daggerfall called The Pig Children.
Yes.
Which is just super anti-orc narration, which is appropriate for the time that you're going around through the Iliac Bay, and Orsinium is kind of being built up, but is considered a threat. And you go like, there seems to be absolute propaganda against.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, actually, speaking about that propaganda, you reminded me of another book, The Nature of Orcs, which is in the Elder Scrolls Online. It's considered at that time. It later isn't banned, but at that time, obviously they had the Daggerfall Covenant, and it was like banned propaganda and literally like written underneath it, like, you know, this book's banned, blah blah blah, because they're like allied with the Orcs and whatnot. But it kind of it alludes to the fact that Malacath isn't actually a Daedric prince. And also, like, when you're playing Oblivion, I think a lot of the other princes referred to him as a pariah, like, you know, like an outcast of princes. And in that sense, I mean, what do you think about that? Like, why do they treat him like that? Because he I don't know. I'm kind of on the fence whether he's a Daedric prince, because he has his own plane of Oblivion, but it's also referred to as the backbone, which kind of like was that plane created when Boethia like destroyed him, and therefore he's not a real Daedric prince. I'm just kind of interested on your narrative and that sort of storyline.
It obviously depends on what your definition of Daedric prince is.
True.
And even going beyond that, I mean, there's parts where there are different narratives having to do with what Aedra and Daedra are, and whether they were kind of cosmically created, or they are these. If you look at the old ways, they talk about because they're ancestor worshippers, that they believe that they were once mortal and that they were sort of transformed and elevated. So in that sense, if you have I think I could go on about this. I think that if you have a Daedra prince who was once a previous Daedra and was transformed and changed certain aspects of them, that they still should be considered a prince.
Yes.
That if you're Prince Charles and you change your haircut, you're still Prince Charles.
Yes. No, that makes sense. Very simple description, but yeah, makes a lot of sense. Okay, so I mean, I heard as well, like, I guess a rumor on the web that you'd also done some Dungeons and Dragons series, like run some D&D sessions with the team before you actually came up with like Daggerfall, and you did these D&D sessions in the Elder Scrolls universe. And I was just wondering, like, how much of that stuff you guys took and then put in the game, how much those sessions inspired.
I mean, there's definitely some stuff that made it into the game at the time. What's interesting was that we did do that, but we also at the time Vampire the Masquerade had just come out, and
yes,
we did some D&D, and then that came out, and even though it was kind of useless for what we were doing in our our working life, we really got into that, and I think probably played more of that than D&D. So the big thing that I think, because we did have some quite a couple of months worth of sessions where it would be set in the Iliac Bay, and a lot of they did not end up being super. They really did a lot of background stuff, I guess is the way of putting it.
yeah.
I remember my character was the Baron of Dwemer, which is a little region on the Iliac Bay, and there was the threat of the Camoran usurper, which we wrote about, and at various times has had more or less lore written about it, but it was all really backstory to like there wasn't a part where we were like, let's play the game of Daggerfall as a player might play it.
Yeah, I see. Totally. That makes sense. As well, you also used to do some role play with some people on the forum, where you would role play Shaogorath. So, I mean, did many stories? Did you like develop his character through those sessions, and like, were there any stories that came out of that?
I guess the short answer is not much. It was really fun to do, and I'm still in contact with some of the people that I did that with. Um, I think the only thing for sure that came out of it is a brief reference. I was hired to do the second pocket guide to the Empire,
Yes.
and I wrote in some stuff that came out about what happened on Somerset Isle with because it was never resolved with you mentioned earlier the tribunal original concept, because it's kind of hovered at the edge of fandom. You have to have played you have to have a deep diver into Daggerfall
Yeah.
to remember or care about what is her name?
The princess, or
What?
no, I don't think that's the right person.
Brenzia's daughter. Helseth is her brother. Morgia.
Oh, okay, yes. Yeah.
That you had a quest in Daggerfall where the King of Worms and Morgia were basically debating, him offering her assistance in her getting married off to the King of Firsthold on Somerset, and in return, she was promising the King of Worms her first. And there, again,
it's another thing you could sort of explore in the narrative, which is really cool.
It's a super specific,
yeah,
very narrow, but really interested.
God, if someone did that now, it would just blow my mind if they just like continued that storyline somehow, that would be so cool, man.
Yeah, so I did make a reference because we explore that in the role playing game. I played her first, also in addition to Shaogorath, and I referred to him as being the current king of Somerset. So it was a character who came out in there. I don't go into a lot of detail in the pocket guide.
It's a very Shaogorath thing to do.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, who is Shaogorath to you as a character? How would you describe him, like from the games you wrote, not how he is now?
Well, that's a good question. I think I really, this is just the honest response on that. I wrote him to be kind of like the Joker in Batman. So he's flexible, that he can be, depending on what writer takes him, he can be a homicidal maniac and super scary, or he could be really silly. So I just found that, and I've never written comic books before, but I always thought that that would be a fun character to.
Oh God, yeah.
To just have that thing where, and it's perfectly fine either way you want to go with him. So and obviously I named him after myself. So I
That's cool. So do you because obviously Shaogorath as a character has changed quite a lot in the modern games. Do you like how he's changed, or do you think you would have written some things he's doing differently?
Oh, I'm sure I would have, but that, like I said, that flexibility was written into the character to begin with. So at one point when they were doing talking about Oblivion, I remember having a conversation with Todd Howard that he was saying, well, why don't we have you come on and do the voice of Shaogorath?
And what did you say to that?
Sure.
Wow.
And I don't remember exactly why I didn't.
No.
Which is fine, because I'm not a voice.
Yeah, I went, to be fair to Wes Johnson, he did an incredible performance as Shaogorath. But I also would have loved to have heard your version now you said that.
I appreciate the sentiment, but I agree that it's a little bit like an overall conversation where, saying would you have done something different in the Elder Scrolls games that you were not the lead designer on, and the answer is yes, I would have done something, but I can't fault the direction that it went. Not only can I not fault it because I wasn't there, and I can't blame people for doing something differently when I'm not there. But they've obviously had a lot of success. So even if decisions were made that wouldn't be the decision I made, I can't objectively say that they did anything wrong.
Well, yeah, I mean, in general, like a lot of people other than yourself since have shaped the lore. Is there like excluding the games you've worked on, is there like a piece of lore that's been written for like one of the characters you've made or something that you've just been like, oh, that's really cool? Do you have like a favorite thing like that?
I mean, it's almost too much.
Okay.
I like I say, I'm happy to be a critic of some things that I would have done differently. But I think that they made a lot of interesting choices. And I also appreciate that they do shoutbacks like to things that were previously established. Like I was really excited when they have you revisit the tomb of Patema, the Wolf Queen, which was a character that
you wrote a book about it as well.
I did. I wrote a book series. Like it was. I've written a lot about her.
Yeah.
Like I think she's referenced in the purposefully dry brief history of the Empire, because she led a civil war, and then going back, I think I wrote it for Morrowind. That I said, well, this is an interesting character, and this is an interesting historical time period that's worth doing more of a deep dive into. And then, however, when did Skyrim take place?
God, what was that? Like the fourth era?
I've done, in addition to the Elder Scrolls, I've done a lot of games that are based on someone else's intellectual property. So the fun thing about doing Arena and Daggerfall and those early Elder Scrolls is that we're making up the world lore as we go along. I've also, for example, worked on a James Bond game, actually a couple, and that's something where somebody else has already created this world, and you're going, okay, well, how are we going to treat this, and how are we going to respond to this, and how are we going to do that, which is also fun, especially if you respect what was done before.
Yeah.
You're not like, how are we going to fix this? This was dumb, but we have to deal with it.
How do you build and how do you make something creative out of it? For sure. It's
So
limits, but things that kind of increase your creativity from those limits almost.
I always think that every any writer or artist that I know, limits sound like a bad thing, but they're really a good thing, because if you say paint a painting and you go any painting, any colors, any subject, any style, like you can't even get started because like there's too many possibilities. But as soon as I start saying only using blue, only like as soon as you start narrowing it down, then your mind starts working on what you can you create on that. So there's a part where so it's Elder Scrolls 6 is the next one. At that point, they're building on some version, and obviously they don't have a huge problem with retconning stuff. So
can't argue with that.
So you'll wiggle your way out of something if you want to tell a different story. But at this point, you've built on enough that you are not starting from scratch, and are.
In that regard, though, is there anything they've retconned that you've just been like, oh no, sort of thing?
No, I mean we talked about the Dragon Break. It's not really a retcon, but it's a solution that that would probably not be my first choice. But
Of course.
I mean I think that there's I don't know where this came from, but it was they republished one of the books, and I didn't write this one, but it was in Daggerfall, The Real Berenzia, where we had a sex scene in there that in the Morrowind or Oblivion or some version of it, they published the book, then they have like redacted by order of the Empire that sex scene.
That's hilarious. But yet we
It's
have
not, that's not a
Lusty
retcon.
Argonian
Actually,
Maid in there.
sorry?
But yet we have the Lusty Argonian Maid 1 and 2.
Yes. So, there's a part where, to me, that's just funny. So,
Yeah, it's hilarious, yeah.
Yeah.
We also illustrated those too, which my fiance did some incredible illustrations, which have like the most sexual innuendo. I'll send them to you after. It's hilarious. Yeah, no. Where are we? Let's have a look. So, completely lost track. I could talk to you for hours about the Elder Scrolls. So, yeah, this was the other one I was really interested in. Mike the Liar. He was added in Morrowind, I believe. Do you know anything about him and his creation?
No. Honestly, that was not me.
So. Okay, fair enough. I read the most bizarre fan theory that he could be Akatosh, and it actually genuinely makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I just thought it was fantastic. I feel like sometimes I have had conversations with designers and writers who still work at Bethesda, and being like, oh, for this quest, like, there was this thing you did with the decisions that was really clever. Then I've asked them, like, what was the actual outcome you wrote? And then their answers actually disappointed me, and I've kind of wished that they hadn't even told me,
Yeah.
And I think there's an element of that where sometimes I read fan theories on Reddit and they're crazy, but they kind of make sense. Like there's a gray area there, where it's actually plausible and there's nothing that denounces the theory as being false. And then I think, like, that's why I like going back to what you said about the best lore is that's left out unsaid, that's left up to debate, because that's when the really interesting theories come in. And
by the way, there's a lot of people who don't give a shit about lore. So
yeah, no, I know.
So to a certain degree, like you know that if you're already doing a deep dive, then you're somebody who doesn't want a simple answer. So if you're going to put lore in a game, if you're not just going to make it, super straightforward, these are the good guys, these are the bad guys, go kill the bad guys, then you should make it something that there's some rewards to explore and offer different theories on that.
Definitely.
By the way, on Akatosh, the story on that name, right?
I heard about some gods being named after people on the forum that you had. I don't know the full. I mean, if you explain the full story for everyone, that would probably be best.
I'm happy to, in part because it's sort of in respect for someone who's passed on.
Okay.
But when we were testing Arena and developing Daggerfall, we had a kind of a BBS group, because this was, again, pre-real internet, that we call the Council of Wisdom, who would test our games, but also go back and forth on creating the lore. And there was a guy named, I'm going to butcher this because he's had a Polish last name, is like Lawrence Sadowski. And
that sounds right, to be fair. Sadowski, yeah.
I don't know. Maybe that
is a Polish surname, so yeah.
Right. But he was like, he would always sign off on his emails. Lawrence Sadowski, also known as the Old Smog himself. So we would call him Smog online. And obviously there's Tolkien Smog.
Yeah, of course.
It was also 20 years before, Peter Jackson created
the Hobbit god. Yeah.
Right. So, not that Tolkien was obscure at the time anyhow,
no.
But when I was talking to various characters, and we had someone named Marilyn, but her nickname was Mara, and so we created the goddess Mara.
Wow.
And we wanted to, honor him because he was such a contributor. But Lawrence or Larry, Sadowski, like these are not good god names, and we couldn't go with Smog because
copyright. Yeah,
it's also a super well-known character, even in the 90s before Peter Jackson. Like, you couldn't just have one of the gods we worship is Smog. But because his sign-off was also known as the Old Smog himself, which is AKA TOSH.
Yes.
We said,
wow.
that spells Akatosh, which
That's deep thinking. I
is
like
about
that. Fantastic. Thanks for that. So,
and he died, so that's why I'm giving it a special shout out for him.
no, I'm glad you did. So, I mean, the Elder Scrolls series has had raging success, but it stands on your shoulders as one of the creators, one of the three founding creators of the series. And I know you didn't actually work on Skyrim, but lots of your work is still, in that game, like in terms of your writing and whatnot, and also inspired quests like we just spoke about. But how did you personally find Skyrim to play as a game in general? How did you find it?
I mean, it's beautiful. I I don't. I mean, unfortunately, my mind immediately goes to criticisms, which I don't think is fair to. I mean, there's a lot of really talented people.
Well, I mean, I think everyone knows Skyrim's a fantastic game. It's a game that I've spent hundreds of thousands of hours, it feels like, and covering. But I think people are definitely interested. I mean, it's very successful for sure, but people are definitely interested in like the differences between the older Elder Scrolls games and your opinions on the newer ones. So I think that's probably what people are like interested in. But I mean, there's no doubt it was a fantastic game.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's take that as written.
Yeah.
All the really nice things that have been said about it, I agree with. So I found the scope of it something I wouldn't have done. It was far too small of a play area. And actually, this would be my criticism of Oblivion as well. That both of those, you take what I really like a big playground.
Yes.
So that would be a criticism. I didn't like that it was super far flung in the future. That the things that you'd done in the previous 4 games were in the distant past. I never liked a chosen one storyline. That just kind of a preference of mine. So yeah, I maybe you could ask me about a specific aspect of the game, whether I liked it or didn't like it.
Well, I mean, taking into aspect, I guess the what you said about the chosen one. Oblivion was the first game I played, and I kind of liked the idea that I was just this prisoner who was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and I got carried along with this storyline where I was like trying to find the right person who was like the only one who could save the world, basically.
Yeah, I mean,
and that wasn't me, which I appreciated.
You're basically playing Ron Weasley.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, couldn't have put it better myself. And then in Skyrim, I felt almost a little bit of like it's a little bit too obvious when I was like the only one who could kill the dragons, and I was like, oh, okay. But I really enjoyed using the godly powers like the voice,
Sure.
and I actually got a lot more excited when I found in one of the DLCs that there was another Dragonborn, and he also could use the voice, and I was like, oh, that I become like I guess more like I've been thrown away. I'm less important, and I thought that was a bit more interesting. There's two beings of power.
I couldn't agree more, and I'll say this also. Like the DLCs, and I can talk about the DLCs for Daggerfall as well, even though there's not really a DLC, but there's Daggerfall Unity, and people have changed things and whatnot. That is so inspiring. Like if you are one of those creators, you should know that we professional designers look at those and go, they're I mean, obviously there are bad ones, but there are also these super inspirational ones. So you go like, that just made what we made so much more interesting. And it's made by someone who really thought about it and decided this is what they want to create, and they're not getting a salary for it.
Yeah.
So that's fantastic, and I agree that adds a depth to the chosen one storyline that wasn't in the original release.
Definitely agree. I think there's quite a few narratives like that within Skyrim. What do you think about the Sheogorath, Daedric Prince storyline in Skyrim? That's with Pelagius. I mean, you wrote the book about Pelagius as well, right?
Yes.
Yes.
I don't know it.
I was actually, yeah, speaking of mods, were there any mods for Skyrim that you played? Or even Oblivion?
Back in the day, but I'm trying to remember what they were. I mean, I think I've played around with a bunch of them. I always think that the maybe because it goes against my design philosophy, I always liked playing the survival ones where
Yes.
It made gameplay harder. But I think as a I'm not paid right now, but when I was a paid designer, you do want to open the experience up for as many players as possible and not worry about. Well, I remember back when I was working on Daggerfall, I had a conversation with Scorpia, who was the RPG reviewer for Computer Gaming World. One of her bits of advice, and even though she was a hardcore role player herself, she told me in creating it, like, don't force the player to eat, and don't, basically assume that the character is capable of doing those type of things on their own, and focus on sort of the heroic aspects.
Yes.
What you need to do. And I took that to heart. But I think that there's, and again, what's great about mods is that you don't
make
have
the decision.
Right. So you say, I'm the type of person who wants to play a game where this type of micromanagement is fun for me.
Yeah.
So I think that aspect of the community has been fantastic. That people can take, whatever, this product and tinker with it to
make it their own.
Yeah, and there's an audience for that. So that's certainly become a huge part in future games that I'm working on, of saying that needs to be implicit in the creation that we are creating. I wouldn't say like a white box. Like there are parts of it that these are the challenges of the games. These are the rewards, and this is how the world is supposed to work. But leaving it available to players to make those changes and make an experience that they want.
I think that's, I mean, just to say, I think it's quite magical to hear the creator of the Elder Scrolls say that, they are totally impressed by mod creators' work that people do for free. I don't think I hear it enough from Bethesda as like a corporate company themselves. I'm sure, and I've spoken to some people internally, I'm sure like they love it and inspired by it. But I like these days I play Skyrim mods, a mod recently for Fallout New Vegas even, and some of the writing sometimes and some of the voice acting, it's at a professional standard. Like it's ridiculous. And like how they take the lore and the narrative that you guys have created and just run with it and create a whole another storyline from it is just something I commend. So I'm really glad to hear that you are a fan of mod creators, because it's I think it's one of the reasons why the series has also survived this long.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I don't have anything else to add.
So I mean, another one is The Elder Scrolls Online, which is the first game you can experience the entirety of Tamriel, the continent, at one point in history. Have you done any writing on that? I know some of your books are already in the game anyway, but have you done any further writing for it specifically?
I have not.
Okay.
Sure.
Is that some? Have you like played the game or like delved into it at all?
I've not actually played the game. I have watched some YouTube videos where people are going, because there are certain places like and I don't know how they pronounce it in the game, but the Arteum,
Yes.
uh,
Added in
the
Somerset, they did that.
yeah. So
And you wrote
that
the
was
book
something that
on Taeum's disappearance as well, so I thought it would be like an interesting topic for discussion.
absolutely. I as we discussed, I wanted that to be the sequel to
Yes.
Daggerfall. Um, so I spent a lot of time thinking about Somerset in general. So we had kind of a plot hook into Somerset in Daggerfall. So I was very curious as to how they'd taken it, and again, I could offer I would have done these things differently, but I love the idea that they did a deep lore dive and respected what had been done before and interpreted it their own way. And you always have to recognize that whatever somebody who isn't creating that world does as a hook for
Mm.
the next game is going to have some either technical limitations or creative differences or whatever, and they're going to change things around. So you can say, yeah, I pictured it a different way, or I think this other thing should have been emphasized. But I without having played it, I'm a fan of.
Well, I mean, the Slodes were there, which was, I think you wrote about the Slodes, didn't you, as an enemy? I
I don't
can't.
remember if I did.
No.
I know there was a Slode in Redguard, right?
Yes. It was also I don't actually know the books preceding Redguard where they were written about as an enemy, but it was, I think, in Yokuda it was said that there were some Slodes that lived nearby there. And I didn't know if that was something you had written about in your narrative of the games.
I don't recall
Okay.
having written anything. Though again, as we've discussed, I found sluggish creatures scary. So
Yeah.
so I don't know. Maybe I have a
Somewhat inspired.
right.
So, what's your favorite Elder Scrolls game that you didn't work on? Obviously, excluding the writing that you've done for games.
Well,
It would be like what Oblivion, Skyrim, Morrowind, and I guess the Elder Scrolls Online and its content as well.
I mean, the funny thing is, because it's the game that it would probably have to be Skyrim. Even though, like I said, there are some things I might have done differently.
Very ironic.
Yeah, I mean, but we always wanted to have dragons in.
Oh god, and they did a good job with that for sure.
Yeah,
like the
that's
scripting
like
on
the
it.
first thing that comes to mind on that
Yeah.
is the dragons. So, seeing
well,
something
I mean,
you always
had them in
Go on.
the Elder Scrolls Adventures Redguard. I know you didn't work on that game; that was Todd Howard. But
Right.
the boss fight was laughable at the end. It was like you just sort of stood by its legs and like poked it, and it was like, I'm so glad they did dragons properly for Skyrim. But clearly, technology wasn't ready back then to do that.
I mean, at least in Daggerfall, we had what we call dragonlings, and said, okay, we're not going to. But we tried.
There was a dragon in the artwork there, wasn't there? Like data mined.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We always wanted to do dragons. So I think that maybe that's the reason why and just say we're going to wait until we can do it right. I have huge respect for that.
Yeah, I'm glad that you did wait in that sense, because yeah, you wanna do those things properly, obviously. But actually, like thinking back to Daggerfall, there was a lot of things in that game, like vampirism, fact you could buy a house, sea travel, a lot of things you never actually mentioned when it came to like promoting the game and selling it. I know times were very different back then, but like, why didn't you mention any of those things? You kind of like left them as hidden details in the game for players to discover.
Yeah, it's a good question because it's funny when I've talked to people about these games before, and they say, "Are tell us about Easter eggs?" And I'm like, the whole game is an Easter egg. Like, it
Yeah.
just jump in and
Yeah.
see what.
Yeah.
And I would say like, "Oh, vampirism," and they're like, "Well, that's not really an Easter egg." And go like, "It is,
Especially
because
back then as well.
yeah, we didn't
Yeah.
tell you you could become a vampire and this is how you deal with it. That there's some percentage chance when you're fighting a vampire that you could become one, and then you deal with it, and you know, so and some people played the game and never got it, so it's an Easter egg.
That's the
Uh,
beauty of it.
yeah, so it's there's no. You're right. It's a different time as far as promoting products and talking about it.
Hmm.
But it's also part of the development. I mean, so we had a very different development in Arena, like I told you
Yeah.
how Arena was developed, and in Daggerfall, we kept very close to the overall big picture design thing, but we were constantly adding stuff. So we would say, oh, it'd be like I said, we started playing Vampire the Masquerade while we were
Hmm.
playing Daggerfall or creating Daggerfall, and we said, oh, we should have vampires in the game, and you should be able to become a vampire, and there should be different clans like there are in Vampire the Masquerade, and each version gives you a different power and all of that. But it was never a big promotional thing. It's just like, this is just
Yeah.
something that could happen.
No, I think it's interesting because these days you have like so many video game companies, and obviously like, making your own game now, which we'll talk about in a second. But like these companies, like they stand on the stage and they're like, "This our game has this, and this," and they more often than not, it's that absolutely every single detail is mentioned and nothing is left just for the player to discover. So you kind of everyone goes in there, and especially unfortunately the case with Cyberpunk as well. Like everyone goes in there expecting all this content. And sometimes, just with the nature of development, something that you wanted to do didn't necessarily make it into the game just because it didn't make sense anymore. I remember at the first reveal for Cyberpunk, we saw at Gamescom, like in a very hidden booth and only certain people were allowed in, and we saw them with the mantis blades climbing on the wall. And then you realize as a game designer later that actually it just wouldn't have made sense to have that in the game. But some people ridicule it because it was a feature that was removed. And I was just wondering, like, if it was like that kind of same narrative that you guys were like, oh, we just want to leave things for people to discover as well and not just tell you everything that's inside the game.
Well, philosophically, you want to always under promise and over deliver.
Are you excited for the Elder Scrolls 6 to revisit High Rock and Hammerfell from Daggerfall?
Is that for sure what the news is?
Well, I can send you my video speculating about it, but there's been some big hints
But that's
towards
not
it.
official.
And well, I mean, in general, I guess, are you excited for the Elder Scrolls 6?
In general, I'm excited for the Elder Scrolls 6. If they're like I'm not sure whether I love the idea of exploring or re-exploring places that have already been in the game.
But I mean,
Like,
you'd be
why
exploring them many years later, right? So they would be completely
True.
different
No.
to how you guys made it.
Well, yeah, which is valid. But Valenwood and Elsewhere and Black Marsh have not been explored in like a single player game. I mean, they've been touched on in Elder Scrolls Online, obviously. And I guess maybe that's also can be a challenge for a single player game when you've got the online one and saying, okay, well, we've kind of now
you've dictated where those locations are, what they kind of look like, and like maybe some design decisions behind them.
Right. So yeah, I can get maybe their challenge is to say, okay, well, now we're going to go into the future and re-explore these things. But I'm for sure interested.
Yeah, I mean, we've got other continents to visit too on the map that you guys made too. So
also that, I mean, I think that if you're really just going to, take some of the concepts and move forward, then maybe get out of Tamriel.
I mean, if you were still working on the Elder Scrolls 6, based on, I guess, the games that have come so far, like Oblivion, Skyrim, and so on, where would you like to go if you were still working on it?
I think the obvious thing is Akavir.
I think that's the fan favorite. I think many people would be happy to hear you say that.
Yeah, no, I mean, but we've written a shit ton about it.
Yeah. I mean, so, Tamriel's invaded it as well. Like, there's so much history there between the two continents. Back and forth,
right? So it's almost like the elephant in the room, where you go like, get there, show it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so that's interesting. I guess like we know the next Elder Scrolls game, like all the others, will be based timeline wise after the current games. The Elder Scrolls Online being based, I think, like second era before everything. Right. So I mean, in that sense, I guess things.
A really interesting creative choice, by the way.
Yeah, I can see why they did it for future games. But at the same time, I guess it limits you in some things, like that you had to sort of begin the narrative. You kind of get the freedom in some narrative choices, but you also have to make sure things make sense for events that happen later on as well, which is really difficult. But again, I'm glad they respected your work, in that sense.
It's what we talked about before, where limitations are helpful for creativity.
So here's a question for you, based on like what you didn't like about Skyrim and the other Elder Scrolls games. What would you want to see in the Elder Scrolls 6 that you think the franchise is lacking?
Well, I'm working on a game myself, so I think that there's a part where like my prejudice on...
Yeah, probably it's already in your game, sort of thing.
I mean, I do think that breadth of gameplay. I'm not a fan of limiting. How do I put? I would like more role-playing opportunities instead of less. So I would like to really, and again, I'm touching on what I'm doing in my game right now.
Yes.
I would like to say, if you're not going to play a warrior, a thief, or a wizard, what are some of the other options? And really dive deep into those. And to think about other ways of playing a game according to again, I go back to like role playing. To me, you begin with the character, and
because I agree. I mean, my first sort of video game where I could afford a console, and I brought like Oblivion. I really did miss from Oblivion to Skyrim that I remember like opening up the guidebook for Oblivion and being like planning out my character, and that was because I'd never played D&D, so. That was my first experience of like, oh, what am I going to do? What do I want to be? And I was reading all through like the different characters and what they were like and stuff. And they had like some suggestions in the guidebook. And I remember, like, even to this day, like that kind of idea when you kind of already started to forge your character's backstory and narrative before you even left that prison was such a big moment that I felt like I lost in. Yes, it's nice to be able to do everything and just run around and more action game orientated, but I did miss that sort of. I felt like I already made something of a character that was different each time when I played Oblivion that I lost in Skyrim.
Yep, 100% agree. But I can. There are game systems where, for me, 90% of the fun is creating that character before jumping into the action. And when we're talking about mods, there's a YouTube series whose creator I don't remember off the top of my head, where he's playing Daggerfall Unity, and he's playing it with various mods, including one mod where they fix what we didn't implement very well in Daggerfall, which is monster languages. And,
Yes.
And in with this modded version of Daggerfall Unity, if you speak, for example, Dragonling or Harpy, then when you run into those, and this is just their way of implementing. I'm not saying this is what we would do in the future, but they can basically friend you and become an ally to you. So all of a sudden, this character that this guy was playing, who had no great magical skills, no great combat skills, was able to become like Dr. Doolittle and talk to these going around. And all of a sudden, like, he had, flocks of harpies that were, fighting his enemies for him and stuff. And he's like, that is so brilliant that, like, that. And I'm accepting no credit for it because, I designed the original in some ways, not perfectly, but people have improved on that. And all of a sudden, this role-playing experience is created. And, going back to our early conversation of being inspired by modders, that's inspired.
One of those, yeah. I agree. One of my favorite things in Oblivion, like sort of later on, was to try and see if I could finish the game without killing everyone, just running around invisible and paralyzing people and just trying to avoid any sort of conflict at all, and just seeing how far you could get. Yeah, no, I love seeing, like, if you can push the game like that. I mean, I think it's a fun way to play that encourages you to make decisions you never usually would have made just running around killing people.
Right. Or if your character is just going to be an effete aristocrat and just being involved in, politics in ballrooms and social gatherings.
Yeah.
Is that a viable gameplay thing? Sure. Now we have to outline that out, or if your character is just gonna, whatever niche thing, and we're, on the game that I'm working on right now, we're not going to hit it all, but we're thinking about it. But I hope that at Bethesda they're thinking about that for 6.
I hope so too. I've got one more Elder Scrolls related question, and then I'm very excited to start my 40 question list about your game, which is rather extensive, but I'm pretty hyped for it. So my last question, which I get kicked if I didn't ask you, is, do you know, like, now you don't work for Bethesda anymore, what's your thoughts on the Dwemer's disappearance?
Oh. So we originally just dropped that in. I think we dropped that in Arena. I think that we originally said, like, some dungeon was created, and I'm sure we called them dwarves.
Yes. You did.
Said the dwarves before they vanished or disappeared, and it was certainly a what we call, if you haven't picked up this theme before, we drop in hooks to say we'll exploit that later, and we'll come back to that. But isn't that intriguing? Don't you want to play more of our games because you'll learn more about this? We don't know what we're doing, but Hopefully, maybe this intrigues you. So I the question was, what are my thoughts about the Dwemer disappearance?
Disappearing, yeah.
Um, I mean, that was the plan all along. That they were going to disappear, and whatever reason they disappeared, uh, would be explored later on. Like, I guess I'm not sure.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense from a writing perspective. Like, then you'd have like a big reveal when they returned, and it would be explained. There were a few questions I got like that actually that people wanted me to ask you in regard to certain things where I kind of knew the response was like, you guys had clearly just written that up to a point where it wasn't explained yet, but you could add it later on and then have a whole narrative surrounding it, but you'd left it open to allow yourself to do that sort of thing. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, no, and obviously there are explanations that you go like, okay, that's the lamest explanation, and the worst way of doing things. But since I'm no longer there, they can do what they want.
No, fair enough. The next part of this interview will cover Ted's new studio, Once Lost Games. What's so special about Once Lost Games is it's made up of Julian, Ted Peterson, and Vijay Lackshman, the three original developers behind the Elder Scrolls series. And they're developing a new game called The Wayward Realms, which has been described as a spiritual successor to Daggerfall. Okay, so now I would love to know more about the studio you founded, Once Lost Games, and what you guys are working on, and who as well is a part of the project.
Yep. I guess I can start at the beginning. That this was, 30 years in the making. That specifically, Julian and I have continued to be friends, since I left Bethesda, and then later he left Bethesda, and we both did games on our own. But it was a series of YouTube videos where it began with him saying if he had done Daggerfall, nowadays, what he would do differently. And he was really talking about some kind of. We've been playing around with not calling it procedural generation anymore, but let's be honest, it's procedural generation of how a landscape and a world can be created using that he could have done better back in the day. Basically recognizing like that there's a sameness of the world, but okay, well, I would think about it differently, and because of today's technology, it would look different, and these are the ways that would come together. And but in the meantime, I had been thinking as a designer and writer about procedural generation from that point of view, and saying like storylines, dialogue, creating NPCs, and that aspect of the world. And then we just started talking and said, hey, let's do it. Let's create that. So we're kind of calling it the spiritual successor to Daggerfall. What we're working on is not in any way an Elder Scrolls game. But we began by saying, and I think there are like 5 pillars of what we think made Daggerfall special, and in each one of those, saying like what we could bring to it, either based on new technology, our experience, and what we failed on before, and said, okay, well, we know that this is what we were aiming for. We missed the mark on that, but we know better now, and we can go forward, because I feel like that level of or that philosophy is not something that you see in current games. Like if you look up,
Yes.
for example, what the biggest game is of all time, like in terms of square footage, Daggerfall is either like first or second, depending on how things are counted. So that was a long time ago.
Yeah.
And
And it still stands the test of time in the sense of how big it is.
but no one's even tried. I mean, I guess that to me is weird that you
I think one thing to sort of set straight, because I think a lot of people, when you say it's going to be a spiritual successor to Daggerfall, immediately think back to how old Daggerfall was, and they think, I mean, I know you guys are making it in the Unreal 4 engine, but like graphically speaking, like you guys are going to not have like 2D sprites and stuff like that,
we are
technologies.
no, and they'll be super pixelated, like like huge blocks of. This is a joke. Graphically, we want to use what's available today, and there's always a discussion, and we've gone back and forth on this as far as what the artistic style is of it. That at the time, I mean, if you look back on Daggerfall, we were making shortcuts or figuring out enemies based on the technology we had at the time.
Totally.
Where we would say, we finally got these machines that would allow us to add particle effects to certain enemies that we had already created, and all of a sudden this was a fire Daedra that had flames leaping off of it, even though it's the exact same model as a warrior who's walking around, and so there's a part where all none of those tricks are new, but nowadays you can do a whole lot of stuff with that type of technology, which we just couldn't do 30 years ago.
No, and as well, like people at home have the processing power on like computers and whatnot to do a lot more and play like games that are a lot bigger. I mean, what I'd like to do, I think, is go over the setting of your world, and then at the end sort of ask questions about like the technological aspects of procedural generation and what's going to be in your game and things like that. But I'd really like to start with asking you about the world of the Wayward Realms, and could you just sort of summarize like the setting, like what is this place?
So the overall setting of the world is what we call the archipelago, and the archipelago is divided up into two kingdoms, but there's a ton of regions within those kingdoms. So up to the north is a region called She, which is ruled by the Orcs. To the south, there's a region called Splendor, which is ruled by humans. But there's a region even further south, which is a sub-region under Splendor called Irodon, which is ruled by elves, but they are a sub-region to the Splendor. And there's a ton of history that's already been written about these, so I don't want to do too much of a deep dive into that. But it's it's a unique setting. But we're calling the Wayward Realms because there's also a history of magic. There was the High Age of Magic, and the magic went away. When the game begins, you're basically there for the new dawn of magic returning, which and magic includes monsters and gamma humans and elves and orcs and all of that kind of returning to the world.
Yeah, so I saw the concept art that you guys released of the Great Library of Logos.
Right.
And it looks massive. I mean, there's like a big channel running down the middle, and I was just like, wow, what would happen if I just sort of ran and jumped all the way down there? Like, it's probably the first thing I'd love to do. But sorry, you would die.
Die.
And what I expected, but I'd still do it. It almost looked just to see what happens. It almost looks like you could, make an entire game based in the library. But from what you said, it's where you start out the game quite early.
Yeah, no, well, I mean, I think part of it, again, it's part of learning your lessons from previous games. Um, I've talked to so many people who played Daggerfall and died in the opening dungeon. So I, I
So you don't want
want
to
to run.
start people in the dungeon, but you want to like visit it early on or something.
Well, I think an opening dungeon is an important thing that I like. I don't want to run away from
Hmm.
that. And want to make it uh, tough but interesting. So our opening dungeon, which is the Library of Logos, um, is not just a dungeon. Like it's basically an underground society. Um, so you are learning not just like it was always the opening dungeon in a traditional role playing game was just where you learned. Okay, this is how you stab something with a dagger, and this is
Yeah,
how you fire an
like the
arrow.
tutorial.
Right, it's training. Um, but there are other things to be trained on in uh, a game that we want to create where it has to do with social interactions and accepting quests and moving around. So it's an underground dungeon, but it's an underground dungeon that is A, huge, B, wacky weird. Like the history of it is something where it in some ways transcends time and space, parts of it. And C, it's also under attack. So
Oh wow.
uh, there's a lot going on
Yeah,
in that
yeah.
opening dungeon.
There's a lot to explain to the player, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. And because we stupidly decided on this world in which magic is returning, um, we have to explain the past and the present, and yeah, there's
In the opening scene
but
of the game.
it's a library, so it's about information. So
True, true. No, that makes sense. I mean, I read that you guys had two NPCs that you said you'd meet within the library that represent two different factions, Sorta, the dodgy lawmaster, and Hypatia. Can you tell me more about these two people? I've looked at the concept art, and from that alone, you can see they're two very different characters.
yeah. Well, if you looked into Hypatia, Hypatia is a real world person. Um, she was in some versions the last librarian of Alexandria, and in real life, she was skinned alive by people who were burning down the Library of Alexandria. So,
Goodness me.
yes, yeah. So, I like to revisit happy history like that. Where, so I think this is the overall philosophy is that do we begin with factions and then we like to look into some factions within that and people having different philosophies within that. So if you are a member of the Thieves Guild, that doesn't mean the same thing to every player. And same thing with the Lore Masters. I'm actually working on a book right now, which is about the Lore Masters 200 years ago, and sort of when they started assembling all of the artifacts and collecting all the books and hiding them away in this island, which is I don't know if I've ever actually made this comparison before, but I feel like to me it's like Tatooine in Star Wars,
Yeah.
where the island where you begin the game is so far from the action of the world, like it's just such a backwards place. But it actually that's the reason why the lore masters chose this location to hide all the most important things in the world, because it's so far from where people are actually fighting. So
Yes. So how long will you spend inside the library before you explore outside? Because it sounds like you've got a lot to take in and experience in there and
yeah.
understanding of the world. I mean, I guess like as a new player starting the game, you wouldn't understand anything going on outside of this confined space. So you would only be limited by like these two factions and their sort of micro ecosystem within this library.
Well, you don't begin the game in the library.
Okay.
Like that's not like that. That's not like you start up the game and you're there.
I see.
There's stuff that happens
There's stuff before then. Yeah.
So you basically, I always hate. I'm trying to always figure out not to spoil stuff, but you escape to the library.
Yes.
And you didn't know the library was the library. You don't know that it's this important a thing. You're basically thinking you're escaping to a cave for some reason. So it's not. This is my.
I don't want you to accidentally spoil anything in that regard. But I
I
can
know
cut it
that's
out
my
if you do.
favorite part where like I just feel like I'm dithering and I'm just trying to figure out what I've really.
No. I mean, I'll pretend this section anyway. With obviously this game's still in development. You guys are still figuring things out, and not everything is going to be like an exact like, oh well, you said this, so this will be in the game sort of thing.
Well, we're figuring it out, and I'll also try to figure out whether we like this is a spoiler or not.
Okay, that makes sense. I mean, I think I fell in love with your game when I noticed one of your concept art pieces. You had two lore masters looking over a scroll, and it had some kind of strange, I think it was like Bengali sort of characters on it. And it could actually be translated to something. It wasn't just random gibberish.
Oh, right.
And I thought that was really cool that you'd actually like created a language in it. And it seemed say,
was that actually ever translated?
I from what I researched, because it was someone posted it on a language thing on Reddit, like there's a whole Reddit thread about like languages, like a subreddit, and someone posted it there, and someone translated parts of it, but there was some words that didn't make sense. So I kind of I kind of figured out that it was something to do with how the world was created, and also there was a part about like a king running to the mountain to hide, and that's what I recall apart. And there was also like they did some worshipping, some gods woke up, and then there was like something that was fractured, and then the world was sort of made out of these stones that were fractured. That's all I got from it. Very very small bits. I mean, I don't know if you want to elaborate on that at all, or if it's a spoiler.
No, the only thing I'll elaborate on is that is been the process that we are in the stage of pre-production where we're doing a ton of concept art, and anytime someone has an idea and we want to explore it, we and this just off at the top of my head because this is something that's been discussed recently. We've talked about the sky and the moons, and notice I say plural moons, but what everything means and what the player experiences. So there's a whole lot of back and forth with our group, which is amazing and very different than what I've experienced before. Because usually, well, going back to my first job at Bethesda, you go in, clock in, and go to your desk, and these are the things you need to work on. And this artist comes to you and asks you these questions, and you go back and forth. This programmer comes to you and goes back and forth.
I got that impression from speaking to some ex-Bethesda employees, and it. I mean, I don't work there, but it sounds like kind of ecosystem where it's a bit like office work. Whereas I've worked in other ecosystems and architecture offices where the ecosystem has been very much like free, and there's big discussions happening, conversations about like work, and people are questioning like mechanics and how things should work, and it's just much more of a like you can throw your idea out there and you're going to have a conversation about it, and it's not going to be like judged or thrown away. But it sounds like you guys are having sort of debates about how things should be still, which is cool.
Well, for the current game, for Wayward Realms,
Yeah,
that is, for better or for worse, the way things are. That there's a part. I mean, if you're not going to pay someone, that you're going to have to listen to their opinion. That like maybe if like someone's a lowly artist and you're paying them, $18,000 a year, and they're just supposed to do shrubbery for your game, then why are you coming into my office and bothering me with your ideas? But if you are not paying them and you're online with them, then you're going to listen to them, and maybe they have amazing ideas, and that democracy can actually work in making for a better game. I mean, at some point, you gotta end the debate and
do something and come up with something conclusive for sure. I mean,
this bush is gonna have red berries. Done.
Yeah, literally. End of conversation. Yeah. But I mean, in the artwork you guys sent me of the concept art for the world, you're kind of looking over this river, and you've got the moons in the background. Yes. Is there like because obviously like back to the Elder Scrolls, the Khajiit had such a cultural influence with the moons. Is there like a similar sort of thing going on here where there's a whole significance behind them?
There is a huge amount. So I guess two things about the sky. I feel like you had a different question before, but we'll circle back to that.
Totally.
I think that it's weird in games that 50% of the screen real estate is the sky, but it doesn't really matter for gameplay. So I feel like A, the sky should be interesting, and B, it should have some gameplay relevance. So
that's cool.
We have been talking to lots of people, including one of the great things about how we've had a long pre-production process, which is a luxury, and have been able to talk to academics and people that scientists, people who can discuss these things with us, and we said, like I said, like I said, the two things that matter to me, like I think it should look interesting and it should have an influence on gameplay. And then we started talking about everything from like nebula in the sky and shattered moons and just anything that just would be weird and different. We're calling it the Wayward Realms because everything should be a little twisted.
Yes.
So without getting into too much of what those moons do to you and what they do to the world, it's not just makeup.
I mean, so in terms of the moons will affect the world and gameplay, that's a very interesting concept in and of itself.
Yeah, no, I mean that's the idea, but also don't think, like, one of the things I've steered away from, and not to go back to the Elder Scrolls and my criticisms of it, but I felt beginning in Morrowind with the idea of the star signs, that simplified player character concepts of saying, okay, well, I'm part of the tower, and because I was born under this constellation, so that's not where we're going with this.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. No, I didn't even expect that sort of comparison anyway, because it sounds like something very much different integrated in the gameplay, not just like the face value. This is your star sign, and it's attached to this perk, and that's the only effect it has on the game.
Right.
It sounds more like these are dynamic things that affect the gameplay as you're playing the game, and not just at the start of the game.
I really, really want to
No, it's like
expose stuff that we've been talking about recently. But,
I mean, another thing about the concept art that stood out to me was you have a giant wall that's separating what seems to be maybe the north and the south, which is like a farmed area with loads of villages behind it. And then there's a river running between the walls. What's the significance of the wall?
basically, we're at the border between the Orcish and the human kingdoms. So
I see.
That is not the only wall. Because that border has shifted through a couple hundred years. It was just the most dramatic shot for that particular angle. So actually, I'm not even sure. I have to look at it and see whether or not that where that's set, whether that's the latest or the oldest.
Yeah, all up for debate where exactly that wall is and so on.
Right.
Okay, that makes sense.
It's the part where the wall is a little weird that it goes up the mountain that way. Like,
yeah, well, to be fair, I went to the Great Wall of China a few years back, and there are some steps that are like literally like you're climbing up a ladder almost. It's ridiculous.
Really?
Like, yeah, and
God.
we climbed up there to like a certain height, and then we got to the top of this like one segment. And there was this lady who had like walked all the way up there with like a whole stack of bottles of water, and we brought one of those from her and gave her like a big tip. But we were just sweating and absolutely exhausted. Like, okay, we'll go back down now. But she clearly does that like every day, and I don't know how she carried that up there.
So is the wall going that high because it's going over a mountain?
Yes, exactly. It's built on a mountain. It's ridiculous. Like, I mean, I've got some pictures I could share with you of it from when we went. But it was literally like you would take a picture like this, and you would be looking down almost like a vertical drop. It was genuinely scary. Like, you know, you were holding on to the side. And health and safety wise, you know, it's just not really a thing.
Wow. No.
Yeah.
No, that's amazing.
No, it's very cool, and like that wall, especially going up the mountain there, just reminded me of exactly that. But I mean, some other concept art that stood out to me regarding languages was you had some like it looked like there was like a rubbing from a dwarven language, and then you had someone had started to transcribe like the English lettering for what each dwarven-looking letter meant. Because I know you had skills in Morrowind that revolved around languages. And I was wondering how, if you were going to like implement stuff like that into the game. Like, I know one cool way they did it in Kingdom Come Deliverance, for example, was me being a dyslexic actually appreciated this, but you had to learn to read. And if you picked up a book and you couldn't read, you could still see the letters and words, but they were completely mixed up. And you could kind of get the gist of something, but you really couldn't understand what the book was actually about. And I was just wondering if you were, you know, thinking about those mechanics of the languages you have in the game and how that was going to work in terms of if your character would understand a language or not.
Sure. No. I guess there's two different ways to address this. One is production and one is gameplay. One of the things when creating a game like this, where there's going to be a huge amount of text in the game, is thinking about what we call localization, which is basically translation. But I guess in a certain way, they call localization a little different than just like straight translation of, you know, okay, well, this game is going to be released in Germany and we need to, you know, change this language. That it's, you know, can be a little more nuanced where you go like, okay, well, we can't have, you know, I always give the example of in Arena, we had an incredibly sexist concept art or
the front cover. Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, come
I
on.
posted that I was going to have a conversation with you, and
That's
the
fine.
image I posted was the arena image, and it got a little bit of flack of like, oh, why this and that. But I mean, I did watch.
It's so bad.
Yeah,
It's so
yeah.
bad. Um,
I mean, times have changed massively in that sense, and I'm sure your
but
perspective
that's an
on
example of localization where you say
yes,
uh, that it's not just changing the language, but it's like we have to change these images. And
mm.
one of the things, and actually, curiously enough, I'm just saying this off the top of my head. I don't know if this has changed, but in Germany in the early '90s, you couldn't uh, kill a person in a video game.
Yeah,
And
that's correct. Some video games were actually banned in Germany specifically because they had violence in. My fiance is actually German as well, so I could ask her for
okay,
confirmation. But
so like their workaround, for example, in Arena was all blood was green because I'm hacking this creature. Oh look, or hacking a guard, and his blood is green. Obviously, he's not human. It's fine.
yeah,
Um, and on the Arena, you know, uh, cover, uh, for some reason, and it's funny because I think
wait. So the
bicycle short,
concept art between Germany and other countries was different.
but I think that they added bicycle shorts. But the point is that when it comes to languages, which was the original question, we recognize that you just can't immediately change a English thing into a German thing or a Japanese thing or a French thing
That
or
makes sense.
whatever whatever group. So that's always been, well, not always, recently been a thing where we have taken that into consideration. Um, in the sense not only of what we're writing for just like a regular book that you would find, we are going to have books like you would find in the Elder Scrolls where you just like
Hmm.
find this book and read it, and that gets transcribed. But also we think about it in terms of dialogue and um, how sentences are put together.
Yes, that makes sense. Added challenge for this generation of games for sure.
Yep.
I'm just thinking back to Morrowind. No, it was on. I think Daggerfall might have had it, but in Morrowind, I know there when you had a conversation with someone, you basically had like highlighted words, like a Wikipedia, where you could click on it and it would give you additional dialogue about like this particular god or someone, a character that you were discussing. I think especially like people getting into the lore and stuff, that is a super helpful mechanic that existed in the game. Is that something you guys have considered doing in your new game?
Oh, for sure. I mean, dialogue is a huge percentage of our conversations nowadays. Um, and beginning with what the character already knows. To a certain degree, in Morrowind and other games, you begin the game as a character who is weirdly enough like a new player, where like
Hmm.
you enter into a world that you don't know, but as that character you should know, and you should have some basis of like you're not newly born into this world,
Yeah.
you know.
It's like a
um
newly born 30-year-old man sort of thing where you just suddenly forgot everything. It's true.
yeah,
I've never
no,
really considered it though.
it's weird.
Yeah.
um and when I'm DMing or GMing a role-playing game, there's a part where I begin in the process of character creation of creating previous relationships where you
Ah.
go, all right, these are characters that already know, and you've uh, had these adventures with them, and you're like you said, you're not absolutely newborn, so
Yeah.
you're uh, they can help you through these things. So if there's a part where just in the average conversation where you're a shopkeeper and I click on you and I can sell things or buy things or just talk to you about life, that some of these like what we call keywords exist because you're not new to this world.
That makes sense. So far, you guys have revealed some playable races, and we've got like 2 concept art pieces from the Cambion Mage and the Cambion Warrior, and they have 2 different skin colors, red and blue, and one also appears to have human feet, the warrior character, and the other one's like a half beast. What can you like explain that race and what's going on there?
So we have another race that's like the Cambion, but we haven't revealed it yet. But the Cambion are interesting in that they are, as opposed to orcs and humans and elves, and I don't know if we've said anything about dwarves, but they are you're born a Cambion, you not necessarily have Cambion parents. So
okay.
Right. So like 2 humans could have a Cambion child.
Is that to do with when you like what the phase the moons are in or things like that, or
unclear?
Okay. So why did one of the Cambions have hooves and like talon feet and the other one didn't?
So Cambions very specifically were created to be devil-like or demon-like or whatever. So like some of them have red skin, some of them have horns, some of them have what do they call them? The feet that cloven hooves.
Yes.
So some of them have wings.
Wow.
It's kind of all across the.
That's cool.
The group of like how they're presented, but in at least our Western idea of what is demonic, they'll have these demonic influences.
That makes sense. Are they naturally demonic or evil in that sense?
I mean, you can play one, so you can choose to be good or bad.
Okay.
I
was just wondering, like, culturally, are they generally considered to be evil?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Short answer, yes, but long answer is complicated.
Victor sent me a picture of the orc. What's the difference between orcs in your game versus other fantasy games?
Well, yeah, no, it's funny because I'm sure you're familiar with this website where it's just exploring different tropes of different worlds, and like our orcs are different than your orcs.
Yeah.
So there's a part where, like, if you're going to play an orc, you have certain expectations, and we don't want to, let you not play that orc. So a lot of it has to do in my way of thinking about factions. That there are different orc factions that have different philosophies, and some orcs. The big thing about orcs to me is always about their toughness.
Yes.
So when we are thinking about their architecture, their armor, everything, we do lean into that. But there are orcs that resist that, and there are orcs that are, even though she is their current homeland, I'm not sure if I'm giving this stuff away. That's fine. So orcs are the original inhabitants of the archipelago where this game takes place. So they have a really rich, distant history in this world. and they've been through a lot, and they have
Yes.
adjusted over time, and have very varied philosophies about what it is to be an orc, and what their background is and where they should be. So they're I think that how are orcs different than other ones? In some ways, they're not. They're you would expect to be. If you say, I want to be an orc warrior, you're going to be this super buff, tough fighter, and your armor is going to be intimidating and spiked, and designed for that. But there's a whole lot more that you can explore within that.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense, and it leads on to my other question about the races having their own identity, not just in terms of like combat, but gameplay, and other races and people that you meet in society treating certain races differently. Like I asked earlier with the tieflings and them being evil by nature, like how in the game are other people going to react to what race you're playing?
I mean, obviously, you begin with the race and say, I'm going to be an orc or a dwarf or a human or whatever. That's like the barest drop into all of the other things you can be. So, for example, if you're going to be a goblin, there are cultural, there's a cultural relevance to being a goblin, and people are going to react to you because you're a goblin and what their expectations of what a goblin is. And there's, parts of it that are appropriate. That goblins tend to be. And I'm focusing on goblins. Just whatever race you want into this that you think. Well, goblins have some contradictory attributes, but they're very quick. They tend to be a little on the chaotic side, and basically, to a certain degree, in the world that we're creating, goblins have a lot of underworld control. So they're very involved in, anything that's going on below the radar. And there are, huge thieves guilds and different groups that the goblins are either controlling or so heavily involved in that they might as well be controlling. But on the other hand, you can, there are goblins that are much more on the kind of Robin Hood, angle of things, where they still don't like authority and they want to battle against it, but their overall strategy is more of like, well, we're not just doing this for us; we're doing this to help. Help the poor.
Could you go the complete opposite direction and play a goblin that in high society who cares about etiquette, or will that be like a struggle to do based on people's preconception of you?
Well, no, well, it would be a struggle. I mean, any of these
kind of
things,
what I want to hear, that it would be a struggle, to be honest, because it makes sense in the world,
right? And it should be a struggle. I mean, again, not to get political or whatever, but like in real life, if you look a certain way, if we're just talking about races in real life society, there are expectations. If someone who looks different than you comes into the room and you're prejudging them, so there's a part, but of that. But I love that aspect of role playing. Of let's twist it. Let's make the orc scholar. Let's make the the goblin aristocrat. The elf barbarian. Like all of those things, I would want to encourage rather than discourage. So, but you also have to come to it with the understanding that you're going against tradition. Totally. We're gonna do whatever we can to make this really fun, and we want to encourage you to do this, but you know going into this that you are trying to break the machine.
Definitely, yeah. That's what makes it interesting. Like we spoke about earlier, pushing games to their limits and seeing what's possible within it. Especially in regard of just, society's going to judge you, have preconceptions of you, but you're kind of just going into it with that sort of character and gameplay for that reason, because you kind of want to challenge those preconceptions and just sort of laugh at some of the situations you find yourself in because of them.
Right. Absolutely. And like I've said, that's been a big inspiration for mods, where all people are really kind of stretching their role playing minds and
yeah
different. So,
which is cool to see you react to that. I think going back to the Lore Masters, there was a concept art you guys released where one of them had like tentacles coming out of their arms. Is that like a race you haven't announced, or is it like a disease or something like that?
No comment.
Okay. I love it.
I knew that concept art would come up, and that's not something we're ready to talk about yet.
Totally. I think mystery is a good thing. I was also sent a picture of the Inquisition faction that also look very mysterious because they're all masked and they carry a tattered banner. Can you tell us something about their role in the story?
It's major. It's their role is basically, and I now always have to think about like what we've talked about and what we haven't. They are anti-magic, demi-humans, anti-monster, and to some degree, at the beginning, they're antagonists. They're more complicated than that. You might play a character who would want to join the Inquisition at some point, because they're not all bad. But there's a huge amount of hypocrisy within their order.
That's what makes it believable, though, I think, when you have different hierarchies and people with different opinions, and it's like, oh, could I side with that person within that faction and change what that faction's doing, is always like an interesting narrative.
Yeah. And any faction, like I said, even when we're talking about the goblins with kind of their it's already arguably a sub-faction within goblins. If you just think of goblin equals thief, going like, okay, well, goblin thief could equal Robin Hood. But then we can even take it one step further, that there's a group of goblin Robin Hoods who are stealing from specific rich to give it to the poor, because other rich have paid them off to not steal from me, steal from you, my competitor. And so like the shades of gray are all over the place.
That's good. I also noticed
that goes back to the Inquisition, where if it's just as simple as they hate magic, they hate monsters, they hate demi-humans, that's
the face value of who they are, but they're much more complex, which is that's interesting. I mean, for one thing, they're carrying these like it's almost like a short axe, but with a poleaxe spike attached to the top of it. And I was told that those were like their unique sort of sidearms that the faction is notorious for using. Can you like elaborate on why that weapon's like special to them?
I guess a couple things I can say about that weapon. One is I don't know if you probably know the YouTube channel or Shadowversity.
Is that the guy who looks at medieval weapons, or?
Yeah,
I think I've seen a couple of channels like that. They're all really interesting, actually. Yeah.
Right. So he's consulting with us.
Oh wow.
Part of the discussion on that has been the practicalities of kind of a new weapon that, you know, like I want every weapon to have multiple uses, and even if you've sort of outgrown that weapon, that like, okay, well, I've got this more badass weapon, that weapon can be useful again later on. So that's been one of my design requirement on weapons. One of the things on that particular weapon shape was that the Inquisition intimidates as much as battles, and I wanted to have a shape that they would basically paint on the side of buildings after they've destroyed them to say the Inquisition was here.
Yeah. This is what happens if you're our enemy, sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So so we actually began with the shape on that, where we said like, okay, well, this is interesting, and this has this meaning, and we can play around with this. Then we tweaked it for the weapon needs, and then maybe thirdly, we don't have a name for it yet, and at some point we're probably going to put out a poll where we, I like off the top of my head, there are 3 different names that internally we've been playing with. I'm kind of fine with any of them, so like, well, let's just put this out to the community and let people, you know, vote on it.
Yeah. I mean, in that regard, and since you've been consulting with someone who works with medieval weapons, how like historically accurate are those weapons that you guys are putting in the game? It seems like so far from what I've seen, it's like very medieval, European medieval sort of inspired. Obviously, that particular axe with the poleaxe sort of spike to it is more unique. And I'm also interested, like, are you actually going to use the spike on that weapon and the axe head in gameplay, or is it just there for show?
Okay, first of all, it's not there for show. I guess that's the first one to answer. That particular weapon, I can name off the top of my head 5 different uses for it. So everything from, you know, slashing to throwing to hammering to, you know, well, yeah, that's 3. I
mean, you can thrust with it. It makes sense. Yeah.
Right. So as far as historical accuracy, I think we begin with historical accuracy just as far as the jumping off point. More important is internal logic. So this is not, we're not doing a real world simulator of the Middle Ages.
No.
We're doing a world which magic, while rare, and this has always been a push on mine, is that I hate, and this is my own fault in Elder Scrolls, that we had the Mages Guild on every street corner, that kind of robbed some of the magic from magic, that it becomes too common.
Yes.
So I feel like magic should be rare and hard, powerful, but, you know, if you're going to, you know, if you decide to become a wizard, this is not the easiest path you could take in life.
On that subject, actually, I played a game recently called Outwards, and their magic concept was very interesting because you basically had to go to this top of the mountain, and you had to give up a portion of your health for mana. So it was up to you, like, how weak you became in like contrast, like getting the power of using magic. Right. I thought that was like a very interesting sort of spin on, like, you know, if you come across a mage, they're weaker, like, you know, because of how the magic system works. But I kind of like that idea that not everyone, it doesn't make sense for everyone just to be able to use magic for the sake of it, you know. Right. And some people, it then becomes like a rarity, and special. Like if you come across a mage, then it's a lot more like, oh my god, you know, I didn't expect that. I need to change my tactics in this situation. It's quite an interesting thing.
No, magic is probably a disproportionate amount of the conversations we're having right now with the the other guys on the project, because obviously that's what's different about a fantasy world, and again trying to capture that. We need to understand where magic comes from and what its rules are and whatnot. But like a lot of things, and it goes back to the philosophy in the Elder Scrolls, is that we don't think that people should be 100% in world understanding of magic and where it comes from and what its upper limits are, and why this herb cures this condition, but we need to understand that, and we need to throw out a dozen narratives about why, different ideas about what people in the world think about that.
That makes sense. I mean, one of the other questions I know people will be definitely keen to hear is if you can craft your own spells. I know, like the system, you can.
Yeah.
Okay, that's really cool to hear, because I think it's is there going to be like how much scope is there and like the creativity that people have with that system?
I'm not sure how to answer that. I mean, it should be at least as much scope as there was, when you created the spellmaker in Daggerfall.
Yeah.
So, combining, this is a fire effect with it damages this and it transfers this health, and all those different formula is definitely part of the plan.
That sounds really cool. I remember like in Oblivion again, like I made a fire spell that I specifically used to kill trolls at a certain level, because I knew it did this much damage and they had like a 50% weakness or something. So if I used that spell on them, they would like die in one hit. So it was just like the troll. You could name your spells as well, and I thought that was really cool.
Right.
Sure. So I love those sort of features. I guess the other question I've got is regarding like you said you can use the axe in different ways. How's the combat going to be?
Probably a little bit of no. Well, okay, I was going to say no comment, but that's probably not fair. Combat is of all the things that we are, sort of recreating from the golden days of the
yes,
and stuff like that. The one that's come the most far in terms of gameplay in modern day. It's still going to be primarily a first person point of view game.
That's it.
And we're always thinking of combat from that point of view. There's just been so many more recent games that have done combat better that I'd say we don't have quite figured out right now, but we're recognizing that that's an area where the spiritual successor to Daggerfall does not, carry the weight.
It doesn't make you excited in that sense, I guess. But like, I think like my 2 cents on combat is it doesn't necessarily need to be like. I think Kingdom Come Deliverance had a very good system in terms of realism and like the swords clashing and really feeling like you had use of that weapon and the different weapons you used. And they actually like brought in medieval instructors to show the combinations that they then captured in their mocap room and everything. But in my opinion on combat and RPGs, it's kind of I think it's like an important aspect and something you obviously do a lot of. But it doesn't need to be like a ridiculously high level complex system where the whole game just becomes about the combat, but it's more about like, can you use the weapons that you've made for the game to their full potential? And I think Mountain Blade, like the system in that is quite simple, but there's so much scope and skill required with each one of the weapons. And some games even, like for example Baldur's Gate 3, You could even just throw your fighting weapon at the enemy, which I thought was hilarious, or throw a boot at them. Even in Skyrim, telekinesis can be used to do a lot of things to do damage that you didn't really thought you could with other weapons. Kind of like you would in a D&D game, I guess.
Right. No. I mean, and all the things you're mentioning in the specific games you mentioned are things that we're looking at. Yeah. No. I mean, that's certainly a challenge in trying to make a game that like I said, with the Inquisitor's weapon is, I don't want you to pick up a weapon and immediately go like, there's no use for this, that it's whatever, an iron dagger, and this is never going to be helpful, and going like, okay, well, actually fairies are iron is their weakness, so maybe keep it around. So even on that kind of rock paper scissors, easy part of design stuff of going like, nothing should be completely useless. Every weapon should have more than one use.
Yes.
And then some of the modern things. I mean, we didn't have like knockback or whatever in Daggerfall.
Yeah.
Like you could have a shield. All that did was add your armor class, but there was no gameplay, in raising a shield at a specific time. So, we that's an area where we recognize we can adapt a lot from modern games.
Totally. I mean, obviously, it's fair to say that time has moved on since then, and a lot of what you were doing in that game and what was possible was really pushing everything to its limit, and combat was as good as it could be at the time, and now you guys are making something completely new. You've got a lot more scope with that, so it makes perfect sense. I know Julian actually spoke about using machine learning for creating an AI that reacts and like makes tactics up to sort of deal with certain situations, just like running it repeatedly until it like figures out the best way of dealing with certain things. Is that some? Can you like elaborate on how you're going to do that? Because it sounds really interesting, but it's not something I know a lot about.
Right. Well, part of it is, I think that the tricky thing with AI is that it's actually really easy to make super smart AI that just like will always kick your ass. And
you say that, but I see so much bad AI when I play video games.
Sure, but part of that is that they are trying to make it so, like, I mean, we're trying to make a fun game. And not just we, but everybody is trying to make a fun game. So there's a part where, there's some part where the AI is bad because it's not good at pathfinding, or it doesn't know the way to get from A to B, in a straight line or around this obstacle or whatever.
Totally.
But that's one aspect of it. But the other aspect is like, okay, well, if it's an archer trying to shoot you, it's pretty easy for it to just always hit you. But to say, okay, well, this guy is, has this type of bow, and we also want to give some random chance of him missing you, and also, diving deep into that, like, you start getting closer, and he goes like, oh shit, he's got a sword. I've just got a bow and arrow. I need to retreat and find another location to shoot at. So none of that, like all of those things have to be happening by design, and for you to, as a designer, outline those, and then as a programmer to implement them. So I'm not sure where this. I think I might have gone off on a tangent.
Maybe a little bit, but I guess I just found it very interesting and exciting that the enemies could be reacting to you and thinking about how they could tactically deal with you based on the fact of you're a warrior or an archer or something. Maybe try and surround you, like, because with machine learning you don't know what's going to sort of come out of it, and sometimes it can, like you say, the AI can be too good and just absolutely destroy you every time.
Also, some enemies are gonna run away, and some enemies
That's good,
are
yeah. Because
not
I
even
think in
they're
RPGs as well, like every enemy seems to have like a real willingness just to kill themselves.
right. No, I mean, it certainly, we're going way back. We like enemies were things we placed in a dungeon who would sit there in that
And wait.
hallway, waiting for someone to come around the corridor and then attack. And you know, any creature or enemy or whatever you want to call it that we've created needs to have, well, let's just say a creature, because like if it's a human or demi-human, then it's much more complicated. So that's a huge rabbit hole to go into. But if it's a creature that is hanging around a dungeon, it's got a life, it's got a this is how it reproduces, this is it's hungry, it's looking to mate, it's whatever is on its mind is makes sense for that creature's ecology. And if there are creatures that if you walk past them, they're tremendously fierce and they've got big teeth and they are scary looking, but they don't care, and they are munching away on some bones because that's what they like to eat, and leave them alone and you'll be fine. But if you hack them, you're going to be in a bad place. If you corner them, if their children are nearby, then you're going to be in a bad place. So it just makes the world more real to me.
Real and alive.
If you just think of like what is a creature really trying to do? Like why would it fight you? I mean, other than to obviously defend itself, or because it's hungry.
So, I mean, you mentioned previously when we spoke about the Elder Scrolls series how you didn't like the main character being the hero and the only one that can save the world, because it's very cliche and does get a little bit predictable sometimes with the storyline as well. Obviously, I assume your game, you're playing a character. Can you elaborate on your role in the universe at all?
Let's just say no comment on that.
Okay.
I think that there's.
I mean, I understand, like, from the script that was translated that there will be gods in the game. Can you access their powers or get their blessing, or like do they gift you with unique artifacts and things like that? So you're not a god yourself, but you have access to some kind of thing that makes you more than just a human.
Well, and and your relationship in our game, just because in my mind, the female energy is about creating stuff. So basically all the deities in our world are goddesses, and they really vary a lot in terms of what they do and what their philosophy is. And the default way of becoming a better mage is to follow a certain path of a goddess. So there are goddesses who, I mean, just in the simplest aspect, if you want to learn Fireball, there's a goddess path that takes you to learning that particular spell.
Oh, that's cool.
So, like, religion and magic are very intertwined in the world.
That makes sense. And I suppose in that case, since you have different factions with different cultures, that like some factions maybe have a certain affinity for certain gods and therefore use certain types of magic.
Yeah, no, that definitely. I mean, we created these goddesses and we created this map and these political groups, and then we said, all right, well, this is a group that is definitely more aligned with this particular goddess.
So, like, I guess as a player who wants to be a mage, you can't just be like, okay, well, I'm going to be the most powerful mage. I'm going to learn all of these abilities and spells, because you'd probably like have to befriend one goddess and get their affinity, but you might piss off another one. Is that how it would work?
No, I mean, I think that. Well, first of all, if you begin the game as I'm going to be the most powerful mage, you should recognize that that's going to be difficult.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
it's not impossible. And again, if you think of like, I don't know, like Greek mythology, that it doesn't mean that if you are from Athens and your patron saint is Athena, that's the only god that you believe in. You recognize like a whole spectrum.
Yeah.
And maybe that's the one you're closest to, but you're going to say, oh, you know what, Poseidon is useful right now.
Yeah. That makes sense.
So I think that there's a part where I like specialists. Maybe my prejudice might be in favor of someone who recognizes that they're going to be, an awesome mage of, fill in the blanks here, that they're going to be an awesome healer mage, or whatever, and really, dive deep in that. But generalist mages should be a thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting in that regard, though. Like saying someone who wants to be the most powerful mage, like forcing them to make decisions on, like, okay, well, this certain god will give you access to this, and then that will give you access to this. So it's like there may be a way to get both, but like maybe that's really difficult to do. I mean, that's when it gets quite interesting.
Well, anything should be difficult to do. I mean, if you're a specialist, that could be a difficult path as well. Once you get to a certain echelon, I always think like you just think about a realistic world where just common things. If you just want to be, if you're going to be a thief and you're going to be someone who's good at pickpocketing, you're going to find someone locally who will teach you the basics of pickpocketing.
Yeah.
Same as you're going to be a mage, someone's going to be able to teach you a few little spells. Like there's going to be a wise woman in a shed somewhere who knows a couple spells. But as the game progresses and you want to get better, it's good. Everything is going to be a quest to
seek out power,
get to that next level.
Okay.
None of those people are going to be on every street corner who can sort of push that skill to the next level.
Now, mechanics-wise, I'd like to ask you about like the faction system within the Wayward Realms, because Daggerfall obviously had a lot of systems that allowed factions and people in towns to dynamically change relationships with one another. Is this something that we can expect in the Wayward Realms?
Yes.
That's really good to hear.
I can expand on that.
Please do.
One of the things, I think that's a funny example of something that was better implemented but less well communicated in Daggerfall. That you didn't know. I'm trying to even think of some of the names of the factions in Daggerfall, but if you didn't know, if you joined this knightly order and you did quests for them, that another knightly order didn't like that, and they had a problem with that faction, and that if you went to visit, let's say you joined a knightly order in Daggerfall and you did some quests for them, and then you went to Sentinel, that this knightly order doesn't like you because of that reason.
Yeah.
We had that, like all of those tendrils were in the design and the code for that, but the player didn't know it, and so you just went to Sentinel and people didn't like you and you didn't know why.
I guess in your new game, then the issue is like, how do you communicate that to the player?
Right. So I mean, that's been a big conversation.
Yeah.
is we don't want to spoon feed anything to the player, but we recognize that we didn't even give a hint in Daggerfall of why these things were going on. So we're trying to ride that line.
It's interesting because I think obviously, I guess some people might not like the whole, you've got like a screen where it's like this fraction is like +10, this one's +100, and they love you, but then that one's -100, and that's why they don't want to speak to you. I guess if it like is given off in-game dialogue, and that's one way of doing it, but also you kind of have the issue of like, if you're a new player experiencing the game for the first time, then the worry or my concern would be like, oh, if I joined that faction, I wasn't even aware of this other faction I thought was cooler, but now they don't like me, and I wasn't aware of the implications of my choices. Do you know what I mean?
Sure.
I guess that would be my concern.
I those are legitimate concerns. So I think to a certain degree, whether it's joining a faction versus working for a faction. So
yes.
So there's a little difference if you are well known as being, a member of Arthur's Knights of the Round Table, and you know, oh, I wanted to, join Mordred's army, but I'm known as being this. Well, it's not to be, you can work around that. But in order to join a faction and really be linked with them, then that needs to be a super conscious choice that you didn't accidentally made.
Okay, that's good to hear. I think like one of the things I really liked about Skyrim, going back to modding, was there was a mod that added patrols of different factions into the game world, and obviously in a way that made sense. These factions would fight each other, like, the Stormcloaks didn't like the Thalmor, so you'd see them battling, like if two patrols happened to cross paths. Is that something that you would have in your world, like a dynamic sort of world where these factions have changing relationships, and it got to a point maybe you just have, I don't know, one faction caravan going to trade with this town, and another faction comes across them and just attacks each other, but it's not like a scripted event. It happens like just as the game world progresses.
Absolutely. No, that aspect of those faction dynamics and who's opposing so and so, and by the way, these are also not written in stone that, faction A hates faction B, and that's the end of it.
Okay, yeah.
Those relationships can change because I'm trying to think of a great example of this.
I think like Mount and Blade 1 and 2 is probably a good example, because in that game you could like, well, I found, as someone who really enjoys like a narrative experience, I started playing that game and I was completely addicted because I was almost writing my own story, and each time I'd play a new game it would be completely different, and another faction would be at war with another faction because of something that happened, and then they'd be fighting each other, and then that faction would be really weak. And I remember, because I worked with the guys on Mount and Blade 2, helping them out with some content and stuff, and one of the issues they had early on in development is that one particular faction just had access to more resources and whatnot where it was in the map. So the whole map was just taken over by, it was either, I think, Calradia or like the Northern Empire, depending on who won this first sort of thing. And then it completely sort of threw the map into imbalance, which was super interesting because it's like, even the developers didn't know that was going to happen. But it made each playthrough completely different.
Yeah. No, that's a great example.
So when you're talking about, like your game and like these changing factions, that to me is super exciting.
Yeah, no. I mean, what you're describing is what we want to happen.
Fantastic. Don't like other factions at the start of the game because they're like after you, or they don't like magic. So I guess there's going to be a natural affinity for those factions to dislike factions practicing magic. Is that correct? Or...
No, I mean, every faction needs to be clearly defined, like what their role in the game is. It should always be more complicated than that simple thing, but I mean, I think there's a part where you define things in black and white, and then you get into the gray. So you you do say, like you said, like the Inquisition hate magic, hate monsters, hate demi-humans. They burn books. They hate, want to erase any part of history that has to do with a world in which magic was even possible. Just basically, they want people to believe these were all folklore and in this backstory. That's a pretty stark plan.
Yes,
but it's a lot. There's a lot more stuff going on within them on that, and they can change. They can ally with one group and say, we're going to put some of these things on the side. If there's a group of orcs that have enough in common with them, then they'll go like, we're going to set aside this anti-demi-human thing, and we'll not all of us. Some of us can't set that aside, and they're going to split off. But there's
okay.
Some big chunk of them that say we have enough things in common with this faction. We'll ally with them.
Would they actually make a sub-faction in that sense, or?
Yeah.
Wow.
No, every
gosh.
I have zero interest in a faction that is so 100% whatever that sub-factions are impossible.
Yeah, I know that starts to really sound like like the real world we live in like a very believable sort of breathing roleplay game that you're creating in that sense.
Yeah,
which is amazing.
Cool. I think so.
Yeah, another thing question I've got about procedural generation. I think some players get worried because quests like go to location X and kill Y amount of goblins or something, which I think there are a lot of quests like that in Daggerfall, which is understandable at the time because it was like procedural generation and what it was capable of. Is that something that you guys are like trying to look into with your new game?
Yeah. So in the same way that when Julian looks at what he did in Daggerfall as far as procedural generation on the landscape or city creation, says, all right, well, these are some things that we did okay. These are the criticisms of it, of a sameness of the world and of just buildings and that whole setup. And this is my plan to address that. I feel as passionately about storylines and the NPCs and those type of relationships to say those need to evolve and feel less samey and have multiple resolutions that if you go to Dungeon X and kill 10 goblins and come back and I'll give you 100 gold. That was procedurally generated at the time. That we would say, fill in. And I remember exactly how it was
like blank and then quest and then blank and then you just
when writing it was percent DM, something like that, like or DN probably for dungeon. Go to and then the code would figure out, okay, well, this is a location within this region, and then we'll just fill in this word and kill percentage number percentage enemy, and I'll give you percentage G gold, and all those things we were calculated at the time, which were like, okay, well, this is endlessly fulfilling.
It's infinite, yeah, for sure.
That we'll change goblins to orcs when you're this level, and we'll change orcs to liches, or whatever
Hunting
the upper
down
level.
Lots of liches would be a bit scary.
Go kill 1,000 liches, and I'll give you some gold for that.
10 gold.
So, yeah, I mean that fulfilled the basic role on that, but it didn't do much for the story. So a whole lot of my work on the game has been to make the stories meaningful, evolve over time. Yeah, I mean, it's like night and day, like what we're planning on for that. Yeah, no, it ain't gonna be like that at all.
Good to hear. I mean, I guess in essence, every movie and series or game can be boiled down to those like core sort of sort of narrative of like, this is the hero, this is this person, and there's like a sort of defining genre in that sense, I guess. I think like even though Mountain Blade 2 with those procedurally generated quests that have been like predefined and scripted suffers in that sense from, you've done the 5 quests available, you've done them all, and you're just repeating them. But the game is still like very exciting and interesting because you've got the whole world going on around you,
Right.
and that's changing constantly. So like you might be trying to go to travel from here to here to do a trade deal, but then this faction's at war with this faction this time, so that could be a lot less profitable for you. So I think even though those procedural quests don't work sometimes in a world that's ever changing, the journey that you have to do to get there is what makes it interesting and exciting. And it sounds like your world's going to be like constantly evolving in that sense.
Well, and that's the way to think about it, is that it's less about like, just going back to Arena, our most archaic version of it. In Arena, you just march up to the king. He'd say, I need you to go to this place, kill this werewolf, and I'll give you 100 gold. And there was no context. There was no like, oh, a werewolf has been terrorizing this kingdom for a while. When I walked into this kingdom, I found the people mourning in the streets, and gravekeepers digging up graveyards where they were filling in all of these dead bodies because this has been an issue. I'm using this as an example, obviously, just to say, like, you don't begin any narrative like, I don't know, a Shakespearean play begins with the first act, which sets up the scenario. So it's part of the artificiality of just like a standalone quest is that, like I said, there's no context. There's no, sense of where is this coming from? Why does this king need me to kill a werewolf or rescue a princess or whatever? And where does this fit in with the whole rest of the world? It's not to say that every single thing you're going to do in the world is unique and you've never seen this in another game before, but it has meaning. It has
that's important.
Has context within the world.
And it sounds like it'll be impactful as well.
Yeah.
I think looking back to Daggerfall, obviously with procedural generation, like the game was huge. Like you had cities that were as big as cities in real life in some cases, and also like the NPCs that filled them were numerous, and they were all generated. So each playthrough they had like different names and stuff. Is that going to be something that you do in this game as well? Like in terms of like how big a city's actually going to be in towns, and will you see more people than you meet, sort of thing?
Yeah, no, a huge. When I talk about kind of the pillars of when we're making Wayward Realms and saying like what we need to make, and there are features that will be dropped, in the course of development, and we'll say like, okay, well, that would have been cool, but we don't have time to implement it, or where there are issues or whatever. But game size has always been a big part of creating this world, and that does fall into category of how to handle large amount of NPCs, and to say if there are obviously parts where you're just like going down through a dungeon and the NPC AI is like we talked about with monsters, so it's just like, okay, well, this is an individual creature that is mostly concentrated on protecting its young, and if you leave it alone, it'll be fine.
Yeah.
But if you walk to a marketplace, there's a group AI that's going on. Or if you go to the siege of a castle, there are conflicting group AIs that are.
You have castle sieges.
What?
You want to do castle sieges as well?
Yeah. Have I not mentioned that?
No, that sounds amazing.
Yeah. No. Other games have done it. I mean,
yeah, true, but to varying degrees of success, it's a huge undertaking to have like armies moving across the map, and the mechanics of a castle siege, as I know from the Mount and Blade 2 development team, it can get very complicated. So
No, I know.
So as long as I mean, obviously, it goes without saying that you have so many years of experiencing in the gaming industry, specifically making roleplay games as well. So I know the undertakings that you're not claiming these things out of thin air.
But if you're creating a world that's in conflict, then I mean, there's a part where I've had discussions with people who, and really more fans than the people I'm developing the game with, who have kind of kingly fantasies where they go, okay, well, I want to take over this whole world and lead armies against another one. And I go, like, to be honest,
it's boring, isn't it?
You want to play a different game. I mean,
yeah,
that's a strategy game to me. Like if
True.
I'm setting this army against that army, and there's going to be hundreds of thousands of people and fighting. This is a role-playing game, and you're a role, and you will see battles, you'll see sieges and stuff like that, but you're in the midst of it. You're not like looking at it from a high point of view.
That sounds epic.
Yeah.
And
So,
I mean,
but-
I know you like your scale, and we spoke about Skyrim, and obviously they had sieges in that, but they were like very underwhelming in comparison to, I guess, technology and them being on console extremely limited. But like the Siege of Whiterun, I felt like I attacked, Whiterun with a smattering of Stormcloak soldiers, and it was really just me doing all the work. I assume these sieges are going to be a lot bigger in scale, especially because the cities, I assume, are bigger as well.
Yeah. No. Yes.
It's I know there'll be a lot of people fans of the channel like comparing it to the Elder Scrolls, and I think maybe their conception when you say a siege, it's like, no, it'll be bigger than that sort of thing. So I just wanted to mention it for that reason.
No, that's fair.
Will you guys have any voice acting?
Yes. How about that? It's not going to be. Well, this is a recurring conversation. Let me put it this way. We're not going to be such a big budget game that we can say we're going to create a world the size of the United Kingdom and have every character in the world have their own voice and be acted expertly by a real life actor who, and I've directed a number of voice actors, so I know that, like, oh no, that line was meant to be read sarcastically, or this line was meant to delivered so and so. There's a lot of technology, and people will show this to me almost daily, where it's like, okay, well, there's this new system where you put this in and they'll, create it, dynamically.
Oh, okay.
My philosophy has always been I'd much rather force people to read than have bad VO.
Yeah, I agree. I think especially when, it's literally, there's a channel on YouTube, I think its name is Bacon, and it literally has loads of funny Oblivion conversations, and it's absolutely hilarious. Like, there'll just be this guy like, I don't know you, and I don't care to know you, and then he'll just leave with like no context. And you start to get into situations, obviously, where repeated lines of dialogue in any game, even Cyberpunk, just become monotonous and boring very quickly because you've heard it so many times. Whereas, like, how many different ways can you say hello? Sometimes it doesn't feel like enough, You
Right.
still heard
Sure.
that same line of dialogue in that same tone, and you immediately get drawn out of the role play. So I understand the decision to be like, if we can't do voice acting properly, we just won't do it. I think that's a good
Well,
decision to make.
and that's where I am. What's today's date? That is 20 on January 22nd, 2021. There will be some VO in the game. There's going to be some. You can't have a silent game. You can't have, if you walk into a tavern. At least it's going to be a grumble conversation.
Yeah.
I think the Morrowind style of, like, hey stranger, well met, is fine. As just we're about ready to get into a menu where we're going to do the real dialogue, but
Definitely.
this is enough to put you into there. Who knows? By the time we release this game, technology or budget or whatever will have reached a stage where can you believe I was going to do it all text?
I mean, thankfully, voice acting is like one of the last things you can implement. So in that sense, you guys have some time away before you can have to make that decision.
Right, but I like the human voice, so it's we're going to use it. We're going to use it in teasers and trailers and in music, and like you're not going to walk in a silent world, but there's also going to be, I think, probably some reading you have to do.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I think there's actually a mod where it's like one of the Google AI or something will read the books in Skyrim to you if you open them, which I've never installed, but I thought maybe it's
I haven't
okay.
either, but that's interesting.
I kind of want to test it out now, but I don't know, like, especially like for different characters when you start to use AI. I mean, I don't know the technology that you're talking about and it's how good it is, but I guess if the voice isn't remarkably different, then your brain picks up on that very consciously, I think. Yeah.
No, there's the what do they call it in visually, the something valley, the uncanny valley, when it comes to the look of characters in the world, and I think that there's that same uncanny valley when it comes to voice, where all just like that one word is said weird, and you go like, wait, who am I talking to? What is you're not real.
Yeah, it throws you off. Yeah, definitely. You said you can have like relationships with many people throughout the game. It's a really important aspect. Can you also have companions or groups following you around?
Yes.
Oh wow, okay, that's cool. So I guess could you, like, if you were not a combat person and you wanted to go into a dungeon where you'd be threatened by animals that you might not be able to deal with, you could hire some mercenaries to protect you or something like that.
Absolutely, and you could even have them do aspects of a quest. Like, you don't have to have them just follow you. You
could send them to be like, I can't be bothered to go and do that. You do it, and you make a smaller profit or something.
Like we need some healing potions.
Yeah.
Go out to go out to the store and get us some healing potions, and have them back.
It's so simple, but no game does that with a companion.
No.
It's something like, like, I guess you'd be role playing in D&D and be like, oh well, I need to go to the store and get some potions to the party, and each person has their own thing of what they're doing in that town, and it makes so much sense to real life because it's just like time efficient. Instead of you having to go and do everything yourself.
Like, if you probably, and I'm not promising much more complicated than that. Like, go to the capital, form a relationship with the queen, convince her to join our side, and there's a part where I'm not letting you just like
no go and finish this elaborate quest line for me while I sit here in this bed or something.
Come back. Yeah, I'll be here.
See, that would be another funny one, wouldn't it? Like, see how far you could play through the game without doing anything yourself, just telling other people to do it for you.
Yeah. Wait a minute, I could be reading a book. Huh.
Like you just spend your whole playtime like reading books while your companions do the quests for you.
You're like, I killed that dragon. Fantastic. Right. That was that hard? Yeah, it was pretty hard.
But no, I like the idea of those just like little roleplay choices. It's things that even some mods have added where it's like, oh, what kind of combat mode do you want? Do you want like me to be far away from you, closer? Groups of followers and parties. Like I think Dragon's Dogma did that really well when you had like a group of people following you and you'd have like an engagement with an enemy, and everyone would have like a different role, like in D&D. And obviously, I assume you can also just do everything on your own.
Yeah, no, totally. And a lot of role players are loners, so they like to, like that to be their aspect. But yeah, like you said, some of the simpler ones of like, okay, we're going to this dungeon, you hang back and back me up, or you go forward and be the vanguard. Like I'm not making a strategy game, so it's not that level of managing.
Oh no, no.
But the things you'd expect to be able to say to a reasonably intelligent person who's helping you out.
That's very cool. Let's talking about relationships again. Will you be able to have like relationships with other NPCs? Or I know people will ask me, why didn't you ask him about romancing or having children? Because it seems to be a huge request from a lot of roleplay game players that you can do that. Sometimes to me it never makes sense.
I'm not putting. Sorry, go on.
Sometimes to me it doesn't make sense, but everyone has their like passions in these kind of games.
And I trying to think of how to phrase this. I find, however you want to call it, friendship, sex, romance, filming a family, all of those aspects of life, very important in real life.
Yeah.
That I wouldn't want to do a cheap version of it in a game.
Yeah, no, totally.
So I think that's where I'm kind of coming from. Is like, like if you said, wouldn't it be cool if fill in the blank?
Yeah.
I would be on board with you and say, yeah, that sounds great. So why don't we do that? Because it's hard. It's
if it's not done properly, it would be lackluster. So you would,
unless I think we're going to do a good job at it, I don't want to do it. Maybe my short answer. So it might end up being like we talked about with Daggerfall with the Easter eggs. That maybe we'll just figure out a way to do it and implement it. And hey, guess what? You can do these things, and that would be cool. It almost makes me icky to design from the point of view of a game designer, how to seduce and romance and marry an NPC.
Yeah.
It just, I don't know, it just makes life like you just kind of want to say, well, like there's different types of relationships, and they're okay, well, these two are opposites who attracted, and these two are people who are longtime friends who felt an attraction at some point. Like that's almost a whole nother game. Like maybe.
Oh god, yeah, definitely. I mean, whole other games have been made about the subject. Some very successful, and I agree. It's like it's one of those things where I think you almost turn romance and what it really is into a commodity, and there's a danger of doing that. And so I'm glad that's your perspective on it, actually. But I know people would kick me if I didn't ask you that question.
No, but it's I've been repeatedly asked it, so I'm glad to address it, and again, I'm addressing it from somewhat ambivalence of going, I'm not implementing it because I don't think that it's important, but almost because I do think it's important.
Yeah, no, a matter of respect.
If we can, especially if either a brilliant design or technology or something comes along that says we could put it in the game, then hell yeah.
Yeah, cool. So another question, because I know you guys had a concept art piece of a werebore,
Yeah.
which was really interesting. Can you become a werebore?
Yes.
Wow. Okay. And can you tell us anything about what that's like? Because I think a lot of people probably think it's a werewolf, but a werebore, or there are like a lot of differences.
Well, or differences between different types of, and I have to work on my pronunciation of this. I keep on using lycanthropy to be across all weird beasts, but that's not technically correct, and that's not what they would say in game. And I think don't have my computer to be able to check this up. It's called theanthropy, which is weird beasts in general. It could be,
Just transforming into a beast, basically.
yeah, a
Okay.
man turning into a quasi this other animal.
Yeah.
So all of them have different traditions, and the process of becoming one. Um, I mean, the easiest way of doing it gameplay wise is to say is like vampirism, that you fight one of these creatures, and every time they slash you, you have a 1% chance of contracting this disease, and this is where it goes. The interesting thing about both vampirism and uh, weird beasts, I'm just going to say that instead of
Okay.
or whatever that term is that in folklore it's a lot more interesting, and there's a whole lot more stuff to delve into, which I don't really want to give spoilers on, but it's not I guess thinking back on Daggerfall,
Yes.
we actually had weirboars in Daggerfall too. We had werewolves and weirboars.
I
So
did
the
not
reason
know
why
that, actually.
we chose to release the weirboar as kind of a nod to
Yeah.
our successor. But in both cases, I think you had the exact same clause. Maybe there was a difference in some of your stats when you became one of those. But the only thing we did was say, when the full moon comes out, all of a sudden you have this weapon, these claws, which are powerful. You can access any of your other weapons or magic or whatever, and every NPC you see hates you. And I think you might have had to kill once to keep your health, or something like that. I don't remember off the top of my head, but that was again, I'll justify it because it was an Easter egg, that it wasn't something that we spent a huge amount of. Daggerfall wasn't the werewolf game. Like there were other things that were going on.
It was just a fun mechanic implemented, but obviously not fully developed.
Right. So we're taking that as kind of our minimum, but there are factions that worship these creatures, and cults that are dedicated to them, and ways of becoming one that don't involve being attacked by one, and differences between different types of werebeasts. So it's a big topic, and I feel like I probably should end it there.
Okay, no, that makes sense. Totally respect. Yeah, I don't want to go too deep into spoilers and things like that, and things that haven't been fully developed in that sense. So I actually had a question here which you already kind of answered in our previous discussion, which was your perspective on modding, which I know you're a big fan of. So I guess my question is now, how are you going to make Wayward Realms moddable for fans, so they have access to it and they can do what modders do?
Well, I'll say this: the only, like I said, that's a big part of what we're trying to figure out. But one of the big discussions about what engine to use, we were originally thinking we were going to go with Unity, because it's sort of more famously mod friendly. And it wasn't until kind of diving into it a little bit more that we said Unreal has that capability and that push as well. So that loosened it up. But that was our initial way of approaching it, is that we would rather, we would rather push the game to a engine that supports modding than maybe go with our ideal engine. So I don't know if that really answers kind of your question.
I mean, I guess another question to do with that is like, like the Elder Scrolls series has, I think, survived for so long with its modding support, and with a lot of the fans creating literally a whole nother game in itself that you can carry on playing all these years later. There's still huge projects that aim to bring the whole of Tamriel into, and other places we've never explored in any Elder Scrolls game, into Skyrim's game engine. Right. A lot of huge projects like that. What's your kind of like ambitions for what you'd kind of want modders to do when they get their hands on the game? Is it just, I guess what we talked about earlier was a little bit was like customize it to what you want, like you have to eat food to survive sort of thing. Sure. But what are your thoughts on that?
I think it should only be defined by your ambition and what you want to create in this world. I mean, obviously, if it gets to the part where like I'm going to take this whole thing and create a whole new landscape and villages and storylines and stuff like that, like, okay, if you got the time and skills,
yeah.
Then,
some people do.
But yeah, but little tweaks, skinning, or like, okay, well, I want to add a new armor type or whatever. Yeah, like I think that a lot of the magic of modding, I mean, maybe the big idea things are sexy or whatever, but a whole lot of these the quality of life or visual changes or what makes a huge difference in the game. So there should not be any real limits. I mean, there's a part where obviously if you're going into a direction that we go like, all right, well, at some point this is no longer Wayward Realms, or this is no longer
Realms. And I think the player always makes a pretty obvious decision that they want to keep their game lore friendly in that sense or not, and that's the beauty of modding, like you said. I still got great respect for your perspective on modding though, because like I said, I feel like Bethesda, I mean, what was your view on their paid mod and monetizing mods? They're still going with the Creation Club and still making content for that. Is that something like you would ever look to do in the future in terms of? No.
I mean, well, at least not the way that they did it. I would certainly want to keep it open to more creativity is good. If someone comes along who is really passionate and wants to be involved in kind of an official creation, then that would be interesting. I mean, I think that one of the nice things about modding is also it's become a way for someone to get their foot into the door for game development. And
definitely.
Look, I can lay out a dungeon level. Look, I can I can take these gameplay elements and tweak them in a way that respects balance while giving this different effect.
It's a portfolio of what you can do. In that regard, didn't you hire some of the guys who made the Daggerfall Unity project?
No, but we're in communication with them.
Oh, okay. Is that something that you've been looking at in terms of like people who have done work on Daggerfall and certain people? Well, I mean, you've already, I guess, consulting with many people who were fans of the franchise anyway.
Yeah.
Which is it's really cool to see. It's really cool to see the creator of something really passionately talk about their game. And it sounds simple, but honestly, I feel like it doesn't happen much sometimes with other franchises. Just passionately talk about the game and also respect how much fans care about it. And you know, I mean, we've been having a conversation for many hours now, and I'm almost on the last question, but that in itself is, I think, a testament to how much you care about the community, and the games that you've made.
Well, I appreciate that, but it has been a thing that's gone back to the beginning, and again, without casting aspersions on Bethesda and what they've done, and obviously they've done a good job in a lot of ways. I agree that there's been kind of this pullback from the community in terms of feedback and interaction, which is something, I guess, to a certain degree, they're a victim of their own success. That you know, once you become this thing that you don't necessarily need to listen to everybody out there. And we were also lucky enough at the early stages with Arena and Daggerfall to be we weren't pre-internet, but we were internet as we know it today, and we could self-select a group. I'm not telling anything surprising to say, like, nowadays the internet can be very nasty, and
very true,
and you don't want the loudest voice to be the one you're listening to.
Yeah, I agree. I think
so.
Yeah, no, I mean, I totally relate to that statement. Like, just in comparison, when I had 1,000 subscribers and used to reply to every single comment I could, things were very different compared to how they are now. And if I do something wrong or someone sees something differently to me, I get a little lashback. And
your hair is all wrong.
Yeah, literally that kind of thing.
Like
and so, part of me has become immune to it, but there's still like a lot of things that you kind of like hit you really deep, and it's like, oh yeah, I was worried about that thing and someone just commented that and now I feel terrible, sort of thing. And I'm sure you've experienced similar things.
Only a couple
and it's so I mean, I think the last question I have is kind of like a suggestion, and it's something that I think would be a big undertaking, but given that you did D&D inspired sessions in the past with the Elder Scrolls, I was wondering if you'd be running any D&D sessions for the Wayward Realm universe, and if you'd even consider streaming them with people from internally in the team, or even other people that you bring on, just to kind of develop the lore and sort of get people excited about the game. Is that something you'd consider doing?
Yes. And it's been discussed.
Really?
And actually, some of the people that we did the games way back on the Elder Scrolls forums are involved in Wayward Realms. So
fantastic.
We've had discussions within the last 24 hours about it.
Oh my goodness.
So it's an ongoing discussion. It'll happen.
Yeah, I guess it's a super difficult thing because
I can't say exactly how.
I was going to say it would probably be quite difficult, especially if you like live streamed it, because there's probably things that happen in roleplay where it's like, well, actually, maybe that doesn't go into the game, or that faction might react differently, or something like that.
Right.
I guess you'd have to like pretense it with like, everything here isn't like 100%.
Well, I'll say this: the most recent discussion has been because this is what we did for Daggerfall, is that we were doing lore setup prequel stuff. So if magic worked differently in our game, then and also we were doing it just based on a Dungeons and Dragons model, so already the gameplay is going to be different than it would be in that. But we went into it saying like we're world building, so if there are some parts of it that don't make the final cut, then that's fine. But I guess that sort of answers the question.
No, that makes sense. Thank you so much for your time, Ted. You've gone above and beyond answering all my questions about the Elder Scrolls and your own game. And I was hyped just writing this interview, getting the chance to speak to you. And thank you so much for just giving your time up for a hardcore fan of the Elder Scrolls series.
No, I appreciate that. This has been fun.
If you actually reach the end of this interview, please do comment Wabberjack or cheese in the comments below, and I really do hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope I did the interview justice. I will say it was a pleasure to speak to Ted Peterson and see how much he knows his own lore, even almost 30 years onwards from when he initially wrote it. This is the kind of passion that makes great games. And I think it's really important to show that you care to the community like Ted is as well. You can follow the original Elder Scrolls creators on their socials and specifically on their Discord at Once Lost Games. All the links for that are below in the description. And do drop a like before you go, since it helps YouTube push the video out to everyone. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and I will see you in the next video.